Hello everyone, welcome back into another stream. Hope you're doing well as always. True Connoisseur, Nightbot, and Mr. Yada. Nice to have you in stream. Doug, welcome back in. Alright, so obviously the past 2 days we've gone pretty hard on the new Shadow of the Erdtree content. I thought about looking at the trailer again, but I kind of don't want to because I feel like we're kind of beating it into the ground there. But there was a new loading screen that was released. I actually didn't have it pulled up. I'm going to have to look for it real quick. That did show a Sight of Grace. So it does look like I was wrong after all. And Miyazaki was accurate by saying that there would still be grace in the, what's it called? The Shadowlands, which is interesting because I was legitimately wondering if there was literally no grace in there, but it seems like there is. So if you look at this place, this looks like where we see the 6 or 7 NPCs of Miquella's retinue in front of the crumbling castle, which may have been burned. I do wonder if there may have been some camera trickery when this thing was getting sucked into the shadow tree. So maybe it was just camera angles. But anyway, if you zoom in way down here at the bottom, we have our distinctive Sight of Grace there. So it does look like rather than Miquella's runes, there will be legitimate Sights of Grace. Oh yeah, and then of course you can see all the architectural stuff there. It's not super clear. I'm pretty sure it's just game footage that they put a filter on to make it look a bit more artsy, but anyway. Right. Scaleezy, Alicia, Register, Without Horns, Clown Scum, Teen Sith, welcome back to the stream. You think you've seen several people typing in the Discord more today in the past 2 years combined? Yeah, I mean, the hype is building for the DLC. The dog heard somebody exist, so he might lose his mind. Alright. Alright, so for today's videos, rather than doing just purely Shadow of the Erdtree content, there's been a couple titles by a YouTuber named Level T that have caught my interest. So I figure we could watch 1 or 2 of his videos and then maybe bounce back to some DLC stuff, but I'm not sure. I'm just kind of flying by the seat of my pants at the moment. All right, so to give a recap of yesterday's stream, we spent a lot of time talking about the trailer again for the story trailer of the Shadow of the Erdtree. And then we only got through one video with Tim Diggity's Mikola is Melina Elden Ring DLC speculation video. And then I guess I could probably put Zafe the Scholar's video after these if we still have time and whatnot. Okay, so that's probably what I'll do. So for today, part of the thing that's caught my attention about these videos in particular are that they're talking about Elden Ring and Dark Souls 2 lore connections, which is interesting to me to focus on Dark Souls 2 specifically rather than the trilogy, which isn't to say that I don't think that there's connections that can be made. I'm just, like, why only 2? But anyway, yeah. So the first video would be Cruelty and Failure of Knowledge, Elden Ring and Dark Souls 2 lore connections. This was made 2 weeks ago. Okay, no. So I lied. This one will be the first one. I think I was looking at this guy's channel, and then I saw there were 2 videos, and I think I was looking at the For You section rather than like the video section. I hate the For You thing. All right, so this is the first one. I'm assuming it might set up some stuff for the second one. So we'll do Kingship and Individualism, Elden Ring and Dark Souls 2 lore connections first. So I can only assume that we get to talk about the throne of Elden Lord and the thrones of Want and everything like that. Scally's had a thing that you wanted to ask but didn't feel like derailing the chat in the Discord. We do have that overspill channel for stuff like that, to be fair. And maybe I'll need to like make a temporary additional overspill at this point. But yeah, congratulations, have a chair for real. So yeah, if you have questions, whether you want to bring them up in chat, as in like the stream chat or on the Discord, feel free. And the Overspill channel is pretty good, like, for everything, if conversations are popping off and whatnot. I haven't really had the need to get an additional channel for that kind of lore discussion beyond that, so we'll just kind of see how it goes from here. Okay, so let's go ahead and strap ourselves on in for Level T's Kingship and Individualism.
There is no path.
That's a little bit loud for me.
Beyond the scope of light, beyond the reach of dark, and yet we seek it insatiably. Such is our fate.
It is your choice to embrace or renounce this. Great Sovereign, take your throne.
But the question remains. What do you want? Tell me. Light, dark, or something else entirely?
So I wonder how rough this is for people who aren't too familiar with Uldia's quotes, because I kind of know them, I'm kind of following along, but it would probably be pretty good to have the text on screen for his dialogue, especially there.
What lies ahead, only you can see.
What could possibly await us?
What makes a true king? We often see a cycle of light and dark reflected.
And if Level T ever sees this stuff, I would try to balance your NPC audio to be more in line with your voice audio.
Through the lineage of leaders throughout the ages. One may rule in an age of prosperity, beloved by their people. Another might usher in a new age of their totalitarian grip. Another might reluctantly refuse the responsibility altogether. Ages and rulers come and go. Dust resettles and clears to make way for the continuation of the status quo or something else entirely. A ruler or monarch takes on a different meaning or weight in the lands between and Drangleic. Here in these lands specifically, being a ruler means taking on the burden of the world and its people. Renown, blood, and lineage mean little in these ever-changing worlds. Here we turn to the lowest of status, class, and fame in a desperate attempt to breathe new life into a tug-of-war of light and dark, or replace the former ruler who has become a husk of their former selves. The throne awaits and will accept you to make the choice free from outside influence. These dying worlds only ask that you carry the responsibility of lordship on your shoulders so that you may keep the torch lit, let it fade, or present an alternative. What do you want, truly? Hi everyone, and welcome back to the Elden Ring is Dark Souls 2 series.
Oh
When
no.
looking at the end goal of both games, they heavily differ from other FromSoft titles. Instead of simply feeding a cycle, we take on a greater responsibility, which is rulership. The concept of ending Dark Souls 2 as a ruler has been revamped in Elden Ring's endings, creating some very compelling parallels. It is often regarded that Elden Ring is Dark Souls 2 too, so we are bringing the discussion to how both games similarly handle rulership, individuality, and their respective endings.
So yeah, I don't exactly know how I feel about the idea of Elden Ring as Dark Souls 2 too. I'm not entirely joking when I feel like that's almost like Lords of the Fallen to a large degree, just because of like the way that levels and bosses are kind of similar to each other. But in some ways, I kind of felt like Elden Ring was closer to Demon's Souls, at least with some of its combat mechanics and like level stuff. But certainly all of the games are different to some degree from each other. So yeah, that's just kind of where I am for now. Hey Doggo, welcome back in. You do think there's a lot to learn about Elden Ring by looking at Dark Souls? Yeah, I agree with that. I would be hesitant to say that Elden Ring is Dark Souls 2, but I figure it's just more of like a gimmick here for now. Captini and True Connoisseur, you said Aldia is slightly more unintelligible than Tom Hardy's Bane. Yeah, I will not be able to unhear that now, so thank you. True Connoisseur finds a lot of DS1 and DS3 in Elden Ring, depending on which aspects you're looking at thematically and narratively. Yeah, I think that's kind of true no matter what. It feels like if you're looking for a specific thing, you're probably likely to find some elements of it in these. Hey, Nightmare Maniac, welcome on in. You said it's not that outlandish. Elden Ring brings back power stancing and thematically is pretty similar. In Dark Souls 2 and Elden Ring, there are remnants of war to explore, for example. Right, no, I don't disagree with that. I'm just saying, like, it's pretty reminiscent of almost all over the games, with a bit more of an exception to, like, Bloodborne and Sekiro, and super obviously Armored Core.
What separates these games from others in the series of Souls and spin-offs is that they specifically put the player in the position of leadership by the end game. The other titles often see the player simply sacrificing themselves in order to continue the cycles of light and dark. Elden Ring and Dark Souls 2 touch on these themes, but have had an added component of leadership/lordship to their endings and overall themes. Arguably, this places an even greater sense of importance on the player because not only are they expected to bring about the continuation of cycle or alternatives, but also oversee those ages as a ruler. In DS1 and 3, we are often seeing ourselves sacrificing our lives in preservation or service to the ritual of continuing light or dark. While the dark endings present greater sense of urgency in those games, they do not show or encourage the leadership of the player to the same extent as the endings of DS2 and Elden Ring. The most obvious visual representation is that both games see the player sitting on a throne at the end game or making the choice to pursue something outside of the cycles taking place in Drang Lake and the lands between.
Yeah, I wonder how fair a comparison Dark Souls 2's ending is to Elden Ring's, because while you don't necessarily see yourself linked to fire and it's left a bit ambiguous, it feels like in order to quote-unquote rule, you would either need to link the fire or let everything fade, and letting everything fade seems kind of antithetical to some of the Elden Lord endings, the base 4 at the very least. Birdie Sanders, welcome on in. You honestly can't get into Elden Ring lore. You just find DS1's lore more interesting. There's nothing wrong with that. We all have our own preferences and stuff. I feel like Elden Ring has a lot of information, but in many ways it's just as inscrutable as Dark Souls 1. I think my biggest dislike of Elden Ring's lore so far is that we never really get to understand the motivations for the characters' actions. Like, we know what actions they did. We don't necessarily know why they did them. And I feel like if we knew the whys, it could make the game a lot more relatable, to me at least. Heyo, Jonah, welcome back in. Tony says Elden Ring lore sucks, can't stand it. Well, if you can't stand it, thank you even more so for hopping in all these streams and discussing it all the time. What are you, some kind of masochist? Scalazy says, for how much weight the fan base puts on the final choices of the games, they give almost no details on them, on all of them. Yeah. True Connoisseur says, you guess the let it all fade thing gets subbed with the Ronnie ending. Just pull order away from the world and leave them in night. I think Ronnie's ending might be the biggest diversion from the old formula, but we don't have enough info about it to see how it like fully play out. To me, I feel like the Frenzy Flame ending in many ways would be closer to the Let It Fade ending, with an asterisk of only really if there will be another cycle after everything gets purged by the Frenzy Flame. Yeah, and as Ash King says, we still don't know why Radahn and Melania fought. Even more so than that, like, why the hell didn't Melania take Godric's rune? I mean, I could at least, like, headcanon some stuff for their conflict between Radahn and Melania, but, like, if the entire point of the Shattering War was to get more Great Runes, why did she just let him go? I'll never understand. Nightmare thinks Elden Ring could have got a lot out of an Eldia-esque figure. Someone fighting the cycle. One of the things DL3's DLC did great was... I'm not sure what you're trying to say. Was Proge? Prove Aldia correct to rebel against the flame. Okay. I figured it out. So it's kind of funny that you mentioned Aldia specifically, since he was like introduced by the DLC, and we're about to get DLC, and we might have our Aldian character show up there. So yeah. All right, I'm gonna go back to the video and then catch up with you guys again.
In addition to playing a heavy emphasis or influence on the idea of being a ruler, both games have specific definitions or meanings of what it means to be a ruler. Being a ruler in both of these lands does not involve how well one governs or manages the economy of these lands, but rather the willingness to place the world on their shoulders and carry those burdens.
And this has kind of always been a really funny trope to me, that like it seems there's a really big trend for people yearning to get to the top and like rule everything. But for me, the funniest part of that is what comes afterward. So do you really expect Darth Vader or Luke Skywalker, if they overthrew Darth Sidious and ruled the Empire in his wake, to really concern themselves with the mundane plans of taxes and things like that? Which kind of reminds me of a really funny, super deep iceberg theory about like souls taxes from like Dark Souls 1. It's like, because if souls are the currency in these lands, then does that mean that there's taxes because there's like a ruler and everything? Like, how many souls does a person pay to like pay their due? It's just kind of funny to think about like what happens after somebody ascends the throne.
The prime representation of this in Dark Souls 2 is through Vendrick's story. In Dark Souls 2, Vendrick is often referred to as not being a true monarch by both Aldia and Nashandra. Nashandra states that Vendrick never took the true throne, and Aldia mentions him as a near-true monarch. Our encounters with these characters that knew Vendrick suggest that he may be the king of Drang Lake, but he is limiting his potential. The soul of the king also states that he was lacking a vessel for the throne. The question is, what was he lacking? While not directly stated, it is heavily implied that Vendrick refused to light the first flame and continue the Age of Fire. He saw an alternative path while looking into the curse of the undead. He states that the true leader must inherit the fire and harness the dark, suggesting that the interplay between light and dark is pointless, and that a true ruler must understand and accept both. As he quotes, "Dark was seen as a curse. Shadow is not cast but born of fire, and the brighter the flame, the deeper the shadow. Inherit the fire and harness the dark. Such is the calling of a true leader. One day fire will fade, and dark will become a curse. Men will be free from death, left to wander eternally. Dark will be ours again, and in our true shape, we can bury the false legends of yore. Only is this our only choice. Seeker of fire, coveter of the throne, seek strength. The rest will follow." As stated earlier, the other titles emphasize more of what is within the parameters of the cycle instead of seeking alternatives out of it. According to Vendrick's dialogue with him when obtaining the crowns from the Lost Kings, a true leader must seek alternatives and seek strength, and the rest shall follow. Vendrick is stating that the tug of war between light and dark is not the only way of a true ruler, and that taking on the burden of responsibility to find other means is what makes a true monarch. The burden could be the choice of what to do next, and making a decision that is best for the world according to their individual selves rather than outside influence.
So this part right here, at least for what I'm about to say, is going to be I don't even say like a personal interpretation. This is kind of like more of an opinion than anything, as far as like trying to read and interpret King Vendrick's actions, in that as far as like Dark Souls 2 goes, there are a couple of times in the Japanese script where it's a little bit clearer that rather than like the chosen undead, the bearer of the curse dying and them not knowing why, the Japanese lines are closer to like, you'll end up in Drang Lake whether you wish to or not. Oh yeah, they say you'll go to Drang Lake and you won't even know why. But anyway, like those two lines are kind of similar with like you'll die, not even like over and over. You'll end up in Drang Lake without even knowing why. But the Japanese is more like you'll end up in Drang Lake no matter what. And I believe the reason for that is in the Dark Souls games, power kind of gets concentrated in itself, and the more power something has, the more it attracts. It's kind of like Dark Souls gravity in a certain kind of sense. And that is kind of substantiated with things like homing soul mass, homing crystal soul mass, the Pursuer's spell. And for anybody who is unfamiliar with those spells, the soul spells are like the light-based stuff that are tied to souls, and then Pursuers are tied to darkness, but they're all similar in that they're kind of hinted to be infused with life, and they seek out more life because they have like life and wills of their own, sort of. And so that kind of leads into the conundrum of the character of Vendrick, because he is this locus of power, but he chooses not to wield it in accordance with the way of the world in Dark Souls 2. And so he is considered a failed monarch, despite kind of being the monarch. So he's kind of like what I would imagine a bearer of the curse to be if they just didn't choose to sit on the throne of once at all. And there are competing reasons as to why Vendrick chose not to sit on the throne. One would be that he wanted to overcome the Hollowing curse, which is a perfectly valid reading. Another one would be that he chose not to sit on the throne because he was actually scared of Nashandra usurping the soul of fire away from him, because she's a child of the dark whose craving is literally insatiable. And then another potential reading would be that he chose to not sit on the throne because he loved Nashandra and didn't want to end that cycle and end like the life that he grew accustomed to. And that might tie into like some of what Aldio was talking about. But nonetheless, it is very well established that Vendrick was looking for ways to overcome the undead curse, but was ultimately a failure. So Jonah said, you want to consume more Dark Souls lore, but you don't know where you can get more than surface stuff. You know more about Dark Souls from playing and reading item descriptions than you do from listening to any lore. So yeah, that's kind of like one of the harder questions to ask, because most of the info does really come from the item descriptions. And then beyond that, it comes through looking at environmental details and piecing things together. So if you're not particularly enjoying like any specific lore tubers, you'd probably need to go into more specialty spaces. I don't necessarily want to like recommend Reddit, because the quality is all over the place, so you'd probably be better off like looking for more dedicated Discord servers for Dark Souls lore. But I mean, after Elden Ring has come out, a lot of people have kind of moved on, because Dark Souls, for many people, might not necessarily feel solved, but it feels settled, if that makes sense. And people are pretty long entrenched in their views, as they have every right to be for a game or a game series as old as it is now. All right. Scowleezy says, you mean linking the fire does lift the curse until the fire fades again centuries later? I strongly disagree, but I don't necessarily want to get into it, because it'll feed the flames, and it takes like a lot of context to explain. At the very least, it's an illusory stopgap. It doesn't do anything. All right.
More on that outside influence later. The idea of what it means to be a ruler is not as much of an overt theme as it is in DS2 in Elden Ring, with a plethora of item descriptions. Elden Ring instead indicates the meaning of leadership through the endings and overall actions the player must undertake and perform. In Elden Ring, the Tarnished is presented with multiple options when looking to shape and rule the world. There are, of course, endings that still play into the status quo, such as the Age of Fracture or the Age of Order. Both of these endings see you repairing or improving upon the established order in order to keep things relatively the same. These endings serve as putting a bandage on the open wound of the world. Other endings, like the Age of Despair and Dustborn, are slight alternatives to the status quo, with an addition of specific affinities such as death from the Duskborn Age or the curse from the Age of Despair. These
Yeah, and I think the 4 base endings are the most akin to linking the fire in Dark Souls, although maybe Dung Eaters is a lot worse than just linking the fire. All right. Hey, Drew. Hey, Galaxy Dragon. Welcome back in. Galaxy says, the curse of the undead is tied to the power of the Dark Soul, which grows as the fire fades. Linking the fire temporarily stops this. I have differing opinions about that, and I'll leave them alone for now. I might touch back on them later, because I don't want to get like too derailed from like this part of the video, at least just yet. Yeah, Clown asks, is the music from Dark Souls 2? It's nice, you don't remember it. Yeah, Dark Souls 2 has a very somber soundtrack outside of most of the boss music. So I have pretty mixed feelings about it. I really hate a lot of the boss stuff. We were talking about this on stream yesterday, that like a lot of Kitamura's stuff tends to be too bombastic and a bit noisy for my tastes. And she did a bit less of Dark Souls 2 and obviously a lot less of Dark Souls 1. And I don't even know if she was on Demon Souls. But to be fair, I really don't keep track too well of the individual composers for the games. Where is me mouse? There it is. Pigsy says, the big problem is that Destined Death is sealed. Doesn't that get fixed even in the Age of Fracture? But that doesn't make sense to you. I don't necessarily think so, because the Rune of Death is already fractured, at the very least from Ronnie stealing a part of it. And the other bit of the Rune of Death, which sprouted in the form of Deathroot via the corpse of Godwyn. So I would disagree that like the Rune of Death, at least in its totality, was returned to the ring in any degree. And I think with the fingers telling us to restore the Golden Order, it kind of wants us to continue that system for whatever reason, and the Golden Order is contingent upon Dust and Death already having been removed from the ring. So, yeah, I don't know. Hey, Jesse, nice to see you again.
Endings still essentially keep the world the same, with some slight alterations. The biggest divergences arise from the Age of Stars and the Age of Frenzied Flame endings. Here we see a much more radical shift, most notably being Ranni's consort in the former and purging all life from the lands between in the latter. Both of these endings do not see the Tarnished becoming a consort of Marika and repairing her in some way. Instead, a new leader is chosen in the form of Ranni, or the world is completely devoid of life if burned with the Frenzy Flame. These two endings operate very similarly thematically to the alternatives that could arise from the cycle, as Aldia suggests back in Dark Souls 2. These endings offer a more radical solution to the world's problems. These endings seek to operate outside of the cycle, which is what Aldia and to some extent Vendrick were alluding to in that game's respective world.
Yeah, I think comparing Ranni's ending to Aldia's philosophy of going beyond the path of light and dark makes a lot of sense, despite Ranni saying she travels the dark path of the Empyrean. The true takeaway there is that you need to forge your own path of lordship beyond the the currently known metaphysical constraints of the universe. And it really sucks because Dark Souls 2 really only has one ending, so there's not like a specific way you do that. Because even with like the DLC, if you get all the crowns, you kind of can sort of break the undead curse, which doesn't make a lot of sense for many reasons. But at the very least, by the time of Dark Souls 3, the crowns didn't really seem to have any strength. And for anybody who may be like wondering more about that, those crowns are hinted to have been collected by Volnir and ground to dust and reforged into the current crown he wears. Hey Kyle, welcome back in. You feel like Ranni just stole part of the Rune of Death's power? You don't know if we have any examples or proof that a rune can be broken into pieces. Well, there's literally the Shattering, but we're told that the Rune of Death, like a piece of it was stolen multiple times. I'll pull up some text. And that it also sprouted in the form of Deathroot. And if Deathroot is the Rune of Death to some degree, then it shows that like the Rune of Death isn't fully integrated into its rune. A ritual performed on the oddly misshapen blade imbued it with the power of the stolen Rune of Death. Close enough, yeah. Then, okay, here's Malekith's Black Blade. After a fragment of death was stolen on that fateful night, Malekith bound the blade within his own flesh, such that none might ever rob death again. So it's very clear here that it's a fragment of death. And then, yeah, even in the Japanese, it's like a part of death was stolen. So, and then we'll probably get something with Deathroot. All right, actually the Deathroot description. All right, so before that, Blasphemous Claw. On the night of the dire plot, Ranni rewarded Praetor Rykard with these traces. Yeah. Traces as in like fragments kind of might be good enough. But I mean, I feel like even you guys know what it's getting at. So then on the night of the dire plot, the stolen Rune of Death enabled the first death of a demigod. Later, the Rune of Death spread across the lands between through the underground roots of the Great Tree, sprouting in the form of Deathroot. Hold on, I'm blind. Okay, yeah, so it talks about the stolen Rune of Death up here. So this one doesn't necessarily say the fragments, so there is some kind of missing information in item descriptions, which is really annoying, but like if you have enough context, you can see what they're saying. So it is annoying that you can't always explicitly trust every individual item description verbatim, and maybe that's something I should keep in mind more when I talk about like how I view item descriptions at times. But anyway, so was there anything else about the traces that I was going to mention? I think that was it. I felt like there's something else though. Hey Pixie, welcome back in. Chubby, we get the rune of death has been unbound. Okay, I remembered what it is. Alright, so let me pull up the old concept art. I don't ever remember where it is. I keep telling myself I need to label this stuff. Because I think it's in here. Okay. So I think even when you look at the rune of death, you can see that it actually is fragmented literally. So it's, if you take like this part, the outer part, to be like what it should look like, I think you can look at the stuff here as though it has been scored and as though a bit of the rune of death has been literally carved out of it, which has a thematic element tied into the way that the black knives have these gashes going down them. The blasphemous claw has a similar gash going down it. I guess I could pull up those icons for you guys. So here we go with the black knife thing, and then blasphemous claw. And then the blasphemous claw. I do think that it might be possible that you can see this stuff in Deathbirds as well, but I don't know. So at the very least, I do think that a fragment of the Rune of Death was stolen from it. I think Malekith's blade is also fractured. Kind of in a similar way. Although it's harder to tell because the blade itself is black. If you like look at the grooves, it's kind of analogous to what's going on with this. So it's not whole is kind of like the big point here. Hey, Dr. N, yes, I just mentioned that. Obviously, you probably said this before I finished that through. Bunkle asks, is somebody else the composer for the DLC, or is it still Kitamura? You love the final song in the new trailer. We don't know yet. We know that Kitamura left recently, but we also don't know if Kitamura had a backlog of songs that weren't used. So it's possible that even though Kitamura is gone, that it could have still been done by Kitamura. Hey, Big Brass and Bunkle. I didn't say hello to you. Welcome on in. You appreciate Dark Souls 2 now? It took you like a decade, though. Pigsy agrees it's not all there, but the cutscene still talks about how it is unbound and Deathstark's fate looms once more, or whatever it says. Oh yeah, I'm not trying to say, like, none of the Rune of Death was unbound or anything like that. I am not trying to, like, get that across. I'm just saying that I don't think that would be the full Rune of Death, because at the very least, we've got whatever the hell Ronnie did and a hell of a lot of Deathroot that would not be within the rune itself. So I just don't think it's full. Where's Crunchy when we need him? He's working on his Godefroy video.
The Tarnished has the choice to directly take on the burden of the world in several different ways. A true monarch, in the case of Elden Ring, is sitting upon the throne and making that choice. Aiding to this notion, Gideon will state at the start of his boss fight that Marika hopes that the Tarnished struggle for eternity. His armor also states that he glimpsed into the will of Marika and saw the end that should not be. Gideon, much like Aldia, is aware of the multiple outcomes of the world, but instead fears their possibility, whereas Aldia has a curiosity about those potential different outcomes. This further emphasizes the possibilities that come with being a ruler rather than a specific expectation to continue the world as it has been. Gideon fears the end that should not be, which could be any of the game's known endings or something else entirely. Being a ruler in the lands between is flipping the script on the push and pull of the world and seeking all possible options. Both Elden Ring and Dark Souls 2 present options to assume the role of leader in order to shape the world in one's image. A leader gets to make the choice rather than having the choice made or influenced upon them. A leader in these games takes on the weight of the world in similar ways versus simply sacrificing themselves or playing into the current cycle. The idea of choice is uniquely prevalent to both games in the series. A king or monarch is not simply a title, but a duty to take on the weight of the world alone for the betterment of its people. Being Elden Lord or ruler of Drangleic have a unique meaning in that they ask the player to take on the burdens of the world, live with those burdens, and do so in order to usher in an age of their individual choice.
And meanwhile, I'm just like flashing back to Ronnie doing absolutely nothing and getting to be like the real ruler, piggybacking off of us, kind of literally, because she's a doll.
A large theme throughout both of these games is the emphasis on the individual and the importance of the freedom of choice and what effect that has upon the player experience and the narrative events. Elden Ring and Dark Souls 2 play heavy emphasis on the idea of the player having the choice to determine the age of the world. In games such as DS1 and 3, there are often outside influences that muddy the decision-making process. DS1 has the influence of the primordial serpents, who are certainly withholding greater truths in order for their desired outcomes to be seen through. The theory of the serpents Frampt and Koth being the same is not too outlandish in my view, given how both will steer you to usher in an age of dark or an age of light, with little to no discussion for alternative or wiggle room. The subjectivity of what these cycles represent or do is not elaborated on. This isn't to say that this option or means of storytelling is less than, but different and has its own strengths. In Dark Souls 2, many characters may reference these concepts of light and dark, but ultimately they are presented as different sides of the same coin, meaning that either outcome really doesn't matter. To enforce this notion, Strait of Alophus states, "Many kingdoms rose and fell on this tract of earth. Mine by no means was the first. Anything that has a beginning also has an end. No flame, however brilliant, does not one day splutter and fade, but then from the ashes the flame reignites, and a new kingdom is born, sporting a new face. It is all a curse." This quote embodies the idea that whatever new kingdom arises will in many ways mimic the kingdoms of the past, making it simply a curse of repetition.
So he might make this point here in a little bit, but I don't entirely agree with that, because I would make the argument, and I know others feel differently about this in regards to like whether or not there was an age of dark at any point in the Dark Souls timeline. I am not of that opinion, and I think it's clear in the Japanese of some item relating to Nishandra, but I can't remember what it is off the top of my head, where it is clear that there's no Age of Dark. Oh, yeah. And then we have like Koth's dialogue in Dark Souls 1 that's kind of mistranslated to make it seem as though that there already was an Age of Dark because of like the way he talks about the pygmies or something waiting for it, or your ancestors. Man, it's been a long time since I've looked at that text. So anyway, yeah, going back to that whole idea of like the cycles and your choices don't matter, I think that gets brought back up into the limelight, ironically enough, in Dark Souls 3, because a number of those endings are about like letting the fire fade to some extent, or usurping the cycle, which is its own thing, which I don't really fully understand. So, pretty much all of these kingdoms aren't done from like a differing choice. It's just kind of been like the same choice repeating itself over and over and over. And so the cycle has never been properly reset. So that second choice, in my estimation, has never been made. But then again, going back to his points here, if you look at the stomp ending or let the fire fade ending, we do have the Firekeeper saying that fire will dance along the horizon. So like it's a pretty big hint that it's going to be another cycle. So why am I making this big tangent about this if it is ultimately the same? That's because when you get to the time of Dark Souls 3, there's a much heavier theme of stagnation causing the natural way of the world to become corrupted. And so over time, the world needs to be reset, otherwise it will become corrupted and like hostile to life, and just truly upset the balance of nature. So it's just imbalanced. So there's kind of another thing to take in conjunction with this stuff, and ultimately, like, clinging to the same choice over and over is ultimately bad. So change is good. I don't know. And then, oh yeah, Happy Hep and Moterian, welcome back to the stream. Eladelia, I don't remember if I said hello to you. And then Pantheon, nice to see you again. Pantheon asks, why does it seem like Empyreans can't enforce their will on their own? They all use lords to enforce their will. That's a really good question. For what it's worth, we're told explicitly that the Empyreans have been chosen by the Fingers, and Ronnie says that she will not be controlled by that thing. So if the Empyreans can't impose their world onto like reality, it could have been because their agency was removed from them somehow, or there could just be some other metaphysical stuff in Elden Ring that necessitates like a god having a lord, which isn't fully explained. And of course, that gets a bit mucked up by Marika's actions with like Radagon and everything. Alicia's still slightly salty that the DLC isn't going to add new endings. I am too. I mean, I'm sure it'll probably be fine. I kind of just expect like another DS3 or Bloodborne situation. Dr. N asks, do I think that before 2 and 3 were a thing, that the cycle existed? You feel like the cycle is something they took from the 2 endings to make the story of 2 work and therefore 3? I don't really know. Or hold on, do you mean like in general, or as far as like a writing perspective goes? Because I think part of the brilliance of Dark Souls 1 was just how well hidden the Lord of Dark ending was. I had no idea about any of that until I saw like lore videos on Dark Souls, because I more or less just treated it like an arcade game the first time I was playing it. So once I learned that there was a lot more to it and it wasn't just this kind of like cookie cutter, generic Arthurian legend ripoff kind of game, I was like, wait a second, there's something to this. And that's literally what like really drew me into the lore of Dark Souls. The fact that we had all these characters either manipulating us or lying to our faces, that is what struck a chord with me, which is partially why I harp so much on not implicitly trusting the NPC's information, because I mean, look at Gwyn and not Gwyn. Look at Guinevere from Dark Souls 1 or Frampt, and I think even Koth is manipulating us. And even if they're manipulating us, that doesn't mean they aren't telling the truth at times. And I think everyone's always out for their own interests in the FromSoft games, which is just very appealing to my sensibilities, because it feels very realistic in a way where we're all kind of trying to make ends meet, and sometimes that necessitates ripping off others or misleading them. Hey, Jonathan Grover, welcome on in. Who do I think Placidusac's god that fled was? Your headcanon is that it's the Elden Beast. Vindicate or vilify you? I am unsure, so vilified. I don't know. So I've had many thoughts over time. Like, there is the possibility that if the Glowmide Queen had the Rune of Death, and if the Rune of Death was in the Elden Ring before Marika and or the Golden Order, then she could have potentially been the god of that time. Or do Empyreans make runes of their own is like another question that I have, and the whole Gex situation is just a mess. But setting that aside, up until we got more information in relation to the Shadow of the Erdtree stuff, I thought it was a possibility that Marika could have been the god of the Elden Ring like since its inception. I wondered if she came with the meteor, since she's a Newman and Newman are outside the Lands Between. So that was definitely an idea that I've had for a long time. But since we've been told that the Shadow of the Erdtree was where Marika became a god, I've kind of walked back from that crackpot theory a bit more. And hold on, let me reread the question. Yeah, and having it be the Elden Beast is also a strong possibility because the Elden Beast is said to be like God slain when you kill it in the end of Elden Ring. So that is a good possibility. And then, of course, knowing FromSoft, it could be any other unnamed NPC. It could even be like that pregnant lady in the photo that, or not the photo, but the portrait that we saw in what's it called in the trailer. And it could even be like that weird dude that has like that was impaled by like the amber looking like stuff. Because this is almost evocative of an Elden Ring or something like that itself. So I don't know. All right, so Dr. N was saying, as in the cycle repeating in the exclusive context of the story of one. I don't know, because like trying to take Dark Souls 1 in a vacuum, I think is hard to justify the nature of cycles, because I don't think we had a lot of information to support it at that time. I would really need to like reread through the text of Dark Souls 1 with that lens in mind to have a more informed opinion about that. Moterian asks, what map is this? So I know this is a fan creation. Like there I don't believe there's been an official map of Dark Souls 2 other than what Kale has in the like manor thing. Pigsy, you really need to watch my Gek video if you keep like acting surprised about my takes here. And Kent thinks it looks like Marika or whoever it was sacrificing to the Elden Beast at the beginning of the trailer. Yeah, there's a lot of things you could take about that way. I almost mentioned like the protection of the Erdtree quote where the Elden Ring became the embodiment of order through war and conquest, which is super cool. And it seems like funneling gold or death into the Erdtree could have been strengthening the Elden Beast for the duration of Marika, Godfrey, and Radagon's reigns. Jonah asks, what is Gek? Sorry, I'm being a little bit lazy because Gek is one syllable, whereas Gloam-Eyed Queen is 3. So it's GEQ, essentially. Yeah, it keeps making you think of Fallout. Fair enough. I gave Moxie some shit the other night when she said Kami. I'm like, what's a Pinko have to do with this right now? no, it's GEQ, not GECK, not the Garden of Eden creation kit. Yeah, you're all good. All right. Very well, Pigsy. Carry on. All right, going back to the video.
This also hints at the binary options of DS1 and DS3 that remove any sense of individuality from the player character. The choices are limited in both games.
All right, I'm going to back it up to get to the beginning of a sentence again. If YouTube would let me.
Embodies the idea that whatever new kingdom arises will in many ways mimic the kingdoms of the past, making it simply a curse of repetition. This also hints at the binary options of DS1 and DS3 that remove any sense of individuality from the player character. The choices are limited in both games to highlight the lack of individualism the player character has, while in Elden Ring and Dark Souls 2 go in the opposite direction.
I kind of strongly disagree with this take about Dark Souls 3's endings. I want to listen to that again though.
This also hints at the binary options of DS1 and DS3 that remove any sense of individuality from the player character.
Okay, so I think what he means by the sense of individuality here, he means like forging one's own new path. And so I'm assuming he's interpreting the Lord of Hollow's ending as just kind of being the ending of a patsy and not an ending that should have organically arisen due to the player's own volition, which, I mean, I can get that, but I also feel like it might be selling the unkindled ash a bit short there.
The choices are limited in both games to highlight the lack of individualism the player character has, while in Elden Ring and Dark Souls 2 go in the opposite direction, to essentially uplift the player character's individualism as ruler of Drangleic and the lands between. In Dark Souls 2, the freedom of choice is presented by many characters, specifically Aldia and Vendrick. As previously noted, Vendrick suggests alternate ways of approaching the coming age beyond light and dark, but does so in a manner that is not as forceful as the serpents of DS1 or the system set by the burning of the Lords of Cinder in Dark Souls 3.
So I feel like part of this is just because we don't see what comes next at the end of Dark Souls 2, because I mean, like, I feel like if you ended the cutscenes of the other endings a little bit earlier in Dark Souls 1 and 3, it would be just as vague as 2, and he could probably transfer his arguments about Dark Souls 2 and Elden Ring into Dark Souls 1 and 3. So yeah, if you just chose to not link the flame in 1, but then just cut the cutscene before like all the serpents and stuff appeared, I mean, you could potentially argue that you could still go down the path of like searching for something other than the flame. But I feel like because 2 exists and it informs us about 1, it kind of contradicts that potential headcanon for your own personal player character, I guess. But yeah, I don't know.
Vendrick is merely making the suggestion rather than presenting the system as only the light and dark options. Aldia operates in similar fashion by offering another option in the game's ending. Aldia asks, "I lost everything, but remained here patiently. The throne will certainly receive you, but the question remains, what do you want truly? Light, dark, or something else entirely?" Here, Aldia is asking the player what they want versus planting influence on them to make their choice. He states that the throne will perfectly accept the bearer of the curse, but also that there are other options outside of the Throne of One. That is a unique quality of DS2, where the player has the freedom to make their choice for the ending and the gameplay function, as well as the outside characters and how they interact with them. To make reference to this divergence of systems of light and dark in DS1, the Emerald Herald simply states in her first line of dialogue, "Are you the next monarch or merely a pawn of fate?" The player has been previously a tool in DS1, whereas here in Drangleic there is something more as an individual. The same freedom of choice that is removed from influence can be said for Elden Ring and its respective endings. While there are many characters that represent those options for the coming age, they too understand that it is your decision to make those critical choices.
The stomp ending, though, I feel like that is the most emblematic of making your own choice, because you choose to take the fire away from the Firekeeper because Ash seeketh Ember. So, yeah, I just kind of disagree with this. Like, I don't dislike his points, I just don't agree with the conclusion so far. Dr. N doesn't like that Dark Souls 3 didn't elaborate on the third choice. Even if there was no third choice, you would have liked to see it. DS3 just loops back. I think like that's kind of the point of DS3, that there just needs to be a balance and equilibrium, even if it does loop back. And I feel like the usurpation ending kind of contradicts that and just kicks the ball a different direction. I don't fully understand that ending, though, to be fair.
This is partially due to the consort system in place. In other words, these characters need you to agree with their philosophy in order to become their consort. This system does not allow for differences in opinion or aim. Marika and Godfrey's relationship is a great indicator of what happens when one consort's views misalign with that of the others. This is all to say that these characters like Fia, Dung-Eater, and Ronnie are not going to force you to bend to their wishes because they need you more than you need them in many aspects. This differs from the serpents of DS1, for example, where they will just wait for another chosen undead to show up and do their bidding with no questions asked. The increased agency and importance of the player in Elden Ring indicates that they have greater worth as an individual as they become Elden Lord. As Lord...
Is that really different than if, say, the player character doesn't choose Ranni or Dung Eater or Fia or Gold Mask? I don't know how fair that is. And Chadwick kind of assumes Gale is the real end of the Dark Souls universe. And then Jonathan Grover asks, what's up with the ending in Dark Souls 3 where you just raise up the embers of the black and white eclipse or whatever? That other ending no one talks about. So, where do we begin with that? The thing is, there's like so many different ways to begin to answer that. It makes it difficult to choose one. And I feel like no matter which one I choose, it's going to end up being a bit dissatisfactory, to be honest. So, one of the things that I think is important in the context of Dark Souls 3 is that compared to the protagonists of Dark Souls 1 and 2, you're not technically hollow in the same way that they are, because you are more explicitly called in the Japanese flameless ash as opposed to unkindled ash. And because you can't have flame, in my opinion, that means you do not hollow until you're able to accept the curse of the flame within your flesh, which requires the dark sigil of like Londor and whatnot. So I believe that when you do take the dark sigils, the darkness that is inherent within the unkindled ash leaks out of them, and in return of that darkness leaking out, the curse of the flame, the undead curse, scours your flesh and turns you more and more hollow. And because you become more hollow and whatnot, I guess due to this like Londorian custom or theory crafting, whatever the hell they did, because you cannot intrinsically contain the fire within your body because you're ash and have already been burned out too much, then the fire can't burn you a second time. So once you become hollowed out, you become a kind of vessel for the people of Londor and the Hollows in general. So you might become devoid of darkness if that much of it gets leaked out of you. And if you take the first flame back into you, you take all the souls back into you, there's no more dark. So that way you get this kind of alternative ending where I don't think life and death are meant to exist. I think functionally they want to remove disparity but maintain their individuality by not being like regressed into the collective unconsciousness of the dark as an entity in and of itself. Because like when people die, they return to darkness and they're terrified of it because of the illusion of life that Vendrick and Aldia talk about. And so when you kill somebody in Dark Souls, you're kind of killing their mech suit of their hollow body, and you're not killing their soul for the most part. So that's kind of what I think. And I don't know if the Lord of Hollows ending really meshes with that idea, but it seems to be a different path than letting the fire flame fade. And yeah, that's pretty much all I've got for now. Scaleezy says, in Dark Souls 1, choosing darkness is saying, screw the system. By Dark Souls 2, it's clear that light and dark is the cycle, and choosing neither is saying F the system. By DS3, Lord of Hollows truly upends the cycle. Yeah, maybe. Jonathan says, literally any interpretation is helpful because you don't understand it at all. Yeah, and of course, like, that's my interpretation. Many people feel very differently than I do about the nature of fire and darkness to begin with. So just note that if you want to repeat some of my points, you will get a shit ton of pushback because there's a lot of context that goes into it, which I just like can't share for time. But I do talk quite a bit about that in my video about like the abyss, the deep, and the dark of Dark Souls. And that kind of gets extended upon with like the other Dark Souls videos I did, especially with the one about like the Lord of Hollows and the true face of man. Hey, thanks, John, for the $5. I appreciate that. True Connoisseur says the endings of FromSoft games are so abstract that they don't find them empowering on a player choice level, even when in theory they have radically different implications. They feel more like thematic punctuations. That's pretty well said, I think. Yeah. And so, going back to what the video said, I feel like the contort stuff could be set aside because you can choose to just stick with a fractured ending, which might like speak more to his point that you might have a bit more agency. But I really don't like the endings to Elden Ring because they do feel so out of my hands for the most part, which is, even though I made the meme video that the Frenzied Flame ending is the best ending, I kind of like that one the most by default of disliking the other ones more, which kind of sucks, to be honest. Yeah, the stickers are donos. Yeah, YouTube's kind of weird. Like, I know Twitch has that stuff kind of get integrated a bit more with the streamer side of things, so like OBS Studio or something like that. But yeah, I should probably like set up alerts sometimes, but I don't really like giving other things access to my accounts a bit incidentally there. Doggo rides for Ronnie's ending. Okay.
Lord, the Tarnished is not a pawn of fate, and even has the choice to approach all of the endings at the end of a playthrough if desired, save for the Flame of Frenzy ending.
Hold on, let me back it up to the beginning of a sentence there, because I was a little bit lost.
From the Serpents of DS1, for example, where they will just wait for another chosen undead to show up and do their bidding with no questions asked. The increased agency and importance of the player in Elden Ring indicates that they have greater worth as an individual as they become Elden Lord. As Lord, the Tarnished is not a pawn of fate, and even has the choice to approach all of the endings at the end of a playthrough if desired, save for the Flame of Frenzy ending. By comparison, DS1 and 3 will often lock you out once you have progressed past a certain point, removing that sense of choice. Even an ending as grim as the Flame of Frenzy, there is very little resistance from outside influence. Melina will not fight you, for example, but simply abandon the Tarnished if embraced by the Three Fingers. The characters essentially leave the Tarnished to their own devices for the most part. The game and its themes present the player with the freedom of choice devoid of outside influence, even with the most extreme or quote-unquote evil endings on offer. To aid the idea of individualism for both games, the player...
Which is kind of funny because in a thematic sense, you literally have to give up your individual identity and your agency to become the Lord of Frenzied Flames, which I think is kind of contrary to his point, but I mean, I still think it works on like a player-based level, but not so much a character-based level there. And hey, Intellect, welcome back in. You're not gonna lie, the only reason why you want the DLC is to know the story, but you definitely feel like you're paying what should have been in the base game. I feel like we'll all feel as though we've gotten our money's worth when we actually go through the DLC. If for no other reason, then that's how I felt about all of the other DLCs. So, yeah. Don't sell you a game with huge missing parts of the story and then sell you a DLC to get the answers. Oh, okay. Now I see what you're saying. I thought you were talking about like gameplay wise. I get you. Okay. Pixie definitely feels like there's an ending or two missing and Mikola could fit the bill. You know, Mia said we wouldn't get new endings, but it sounds like the idea has sort of endings. So all of the other DLCs have been relatively self-contained, so I don't imagine this one would be too different. It might help elucidate some of the consequences of the other endings through other implications, but I don't really know. Moterian thinks the new trailers... Hold on. You think the new trailer possible reasons to multiple endings? And also, many of the videos of people connecting Sunsoft universe? I'm sorry, bro. I didn't understand that super well. Pixie says, isn't the Frenzied Flame the only ending that you don't choose at the end of the game? If you have the Frenzied Flame, you can't choose a different ending. I don't remember if Ronnie's sign appears, but I'm pretty sure you're correct there. I'm pretty confident her summon sign doesn't appear, so yes. But you could technically always go get Mikola's needle and fix it, so yeah. True Connoisseur really thinks there needed to be an Age of Fractury ending where you just dissipate the Elden Ring more gently than you do with the Frenzied Flame stuff. So, yeah, I know you specified the Age of Fracture ending, but I think that's what they wanted to go with, Ronnie. But it does suck that you can't necessarily do it yourself. So, I do feel like the Lord of Elden Ring, the Monarch, if you will, is much more limited in their power than the Monarchs of Dark Souls 1, 2, and 3.
It represents the lowest form of life. The bearer of the curse is mocked at the start of the game by the Fire Keepers, and the tarnished is...
Damn, Jonah donating $20 just totally crashed the stream. Good job, Jonah. Thank you. You've been meaning to throw down for the cause, but you're stream illiterate. Oh, no, I appreciate that. Yeah, thanks so much for the 20. Yeah. And... I did YouTube
lesser
die.
than
Okay.
by the likes of many characters.
Let me back up. YouTube being YouTube. It broke the thing. Nah, this is a YouTube issue. It only happens when I stream though, so I figure there has to be some interaction with OBS.
The lowest form of life. The bearer of the curse is mocked at the start of the game by the Fire Keepers, and the tarnished is seen as lesser than by the likes of many characters such as
Oh my god, bro.
Morgott and Godric.
It's probably because it's on auto.
Gideon even states in his...
I think it's just like cycling between qualities really quickly there, and that was part of the issue. So maybe it is my internet, but I mean, like my download speed's really good, just not upload, which is why I have to stream in 720p. Don't y'all know prime time is 11 o'clock at night? I guess I did drop some frames, although I could have dropped them earlier. So how's your day going, chat?
dying words.
Oh, okay. I just had to try to interact with chat to get it to start. Okay. No crane for Jonah today. You're manning the lower two levels of the plant today. Crane days rotate. Interesting. Do you mind if we ask what you do? You could totally just elect to not answer that. And Okiman, welcome on in. Gideon has great posture there. Well, he does have the most in common with the gamer, doesn't he? Why is it buffering again? Scully's says, Randy takes the order and leaves, leaving the lands between without an Elden Ring or a god to affect things. Well, she still kind of sort of exists, so she could affect things if she wanted to, but she don't want to. I don't blame her. It would be quite nice to be a hermit in many ways. All right, I'm going to do the hard refresh thing, because this is just ridiculous, YouTube. And for anybody who doesn't know like what a hard refresh is, rather than just pressing F5, if you do Control F5, it's supposed to like reload every asset rather than what's been like saved in your cached system, however you want to pronounce it.
Quote, evil endings on offer. To aid the idea of individualism for both games, the player represents the lowest form of life. The bearer of the curse is mocked at the start of the game by the Fire Keepers, and the tarnished is seen as lesser than by the likes of many characters such as Morgoth and Godric. Gideon even states in his dying words that a man cannot kill a god, which plays on the idea that we in fact can, expressing the capabilities of the individual. Both games give the potential of rulership to the lowest of status. Thus they must rely on the individual deeds of those low life forms rather than inheritance or title. In other words, the lowest of life forms get to become rulers, where the lowest of life forms of DS1 and DS3 become kindling or become a Lord of Hollows while at the beck and call of outside influencers. The themes of Dark Souls 2 and Elden Ring share a different approach, where the bearer of the curse and the tarnished get to have a greater say in their choice of rule, as well as what follows within that age, or at the very least it is implied that freedom will be present after the credits roll. The fact that we end both games potentially on the throne also aids to the power of the individual and the importance of their choice, rather than simply being burned up or a pawn of someone else's desires.
I mean, is it truly fair to call yourself a pawn of somebody else's desires, even with like the dark ending of DS1? Because I mean, you still have to make a choice whether or not you want to link or not link, and you could make any number of arguments for why you made that choice. So, I'm trying to think, how much is necessary to actually do the Dark Lord ending in Dark Souls 1? Isn't it just like leaving? Yeah, you could just like leave the throne room without even ever talking to Koth, couldn't you? Or is that not right? Do you need to do the Artoria stuff? I think so. No, that's how you have to meet Koth. But I think you can just walk away and it'll auto cutscene. I don't know. It's been a really long time since I actually like played through DS1, and I don't know if I ever just tried to like walk away when I wasn't explicitly going for the Dark Lord ending and doing all that stuff. So hey, Ponyboy, welcome back in. You thought the implication was that Ranni has her own order that isn't touchable by anyone but her. Yeah, I do think that is the implication. I'm a little bit skeptical because you have like outer gods trying to influence things. Is Ranni going to be immune to their meddling if they do like actively meddle? Could she just be like floating out in space and just get randomly run over by a flying Astel? I don't know. And then like, although in the English she says like it's going to be a 1,000-year journey, well, what comes at the end of that journey then? The Japanese is more like it'll be an age-long journey. It does technically literally use the characters for 1,000 years, but I'm pretty confident that's pretty just poetic language. So anyway. Eric asks, how the hell do the people get past the catacombs in Dark Souls 1? So as soon as you come out of the Undead Asylum, if you go to the right... No. So... the catacombs, if this is like a legitimate question, that should not be like the first area you visit in the game. So yeah. Okay, Jonah. Yeah, you're like an energy plant engineer or boiler operator. That's cool. Only been doing that for like a year though. Well, hope it's going well, man. Itching at the fact that the trailer shows another entrance or exit of the Shadow Realm. We're all a little bit stir crazy with this DLC info. Hey Aiden, welcome on in. The Elden Ring continues to exist at the end of Ranni, but she takes it with her. Life in the lands between depends on the Elden Ring. I don't know if that's true. Like, I think at the very least the Elden Ring's primal vital energies would be in her, but if it ends up becoming a different shape, I think is a matter that's a little bit open for interpretation. So I don't necessarily think you're wrong, but I don't think we have the full story there. 99% of DS1 players got their ending by accident. Yeah, I'm like, oh, a bonfire. What? I'm on fire? This sucks. Kill Gwyn and walk away. Yeah, you don't need to meet Koth. Yeah, so that's actually a pretty big strike against this idea here. Like, I get where he's coming from, but I feel like this kind of like argument tends to happen when you're too familiar with the game and you forget like the very basics. Like I was like, wait, can you just walk away from Koth? It's because you already know about Koth so much and he's been in like your mindset for so long that it's kind of hard to forget about him. But you definitely don't need to meet him. And thank you so much for clarifying, Jay Dixon, and welcome back to stream. And Clowny, yeah. And everybody else. Hey, Galamoth, welcome in. She did manage to rid herself of the Greater Will's influence. That's something. I don't know if she rid herself of the Greater Will's influence or if it was just the Two Fingers. So maybe I don't bring this point up often enough to help break the chains on everyone's mind about like the Two Fingers and how benevolent they are. But we do have an example of fingers which seem to have their own agenda, but nobody really seems to question that in the Three Fingers. And if the Three Fingers and the Two Fingers are kind of like the same type of organism, who is to say that the Two Fingers aren't doing something similarly to the Three Fingers, but with a bit of a softer touch because they have less fingers? Scowleezy says, we also only need 2 runes to get the ending. We leave some great runes behind. Yeah, it's really messed up. I don't know like how controversial this is, but I do kind of wish that you couldn't get like the Ronnie ending or something like that without getting all of the great runes, and only from getting all of the great runes together could you fight the Elden Beast directly, kind of like the moon presence in Bloodborne. Spoilers. So, yeah, it would definitely also be nicer if Radagon and the Elden Beast had a little bit of a boss break between them rather than needing to fight them one after the other. Because I think both are fine individually, but doing them together and just trying to chase down the Elden Beast as a melee build is just, it's not fun, bro. Hey, Without Horns, welcome back. That moment when you find out Gwyn can be parried. That is the moment I got good. For real. I was really bad at Dark Souls 1, and then I saw a video of Gwyn just getting parry stomped, and I was like, what? And then I did it, and I was like, oh my god. He's not even a boss anymore. Hey, Rich Piana, welcome back in. And Stella, nice to see you. Jonah asks, is the Greater Will an outer god? That is a very common question. We don't have a direct answer. One thing that I'll postulate is that if the order is contained by the Elden Ring and the Greater Will is part of that order, could it be thought of as an inner god rather than an outer god? So it might be the same classification of being as an outer god, but its function seems to be potentially different. But still a good question nonetheless. There's a myth of Astraea who flees to space after being disappointed with the Earth. Is that where they got Maiden Astraea's name from? I have not heard that. Okay. I'm going to go back to the video, but great comments, guys. I appreciate it.
After looking at the themes and their depiction in both games, Elden Ring and Dark Souls 2 have a unique and specific way of viewing monarchy, what it means to be a ruler, and the importance of choice and individualism. With all of these very abstract and sometimes tightly interwoven concepts, feel free to let me know if I might have missed a bit of evidence from any item descriptions or dialogue. For this video, it's
Damn, only item descriptions and dialogue. Guess we can't tell him we missed Koth, or that you could miss Koth. No, I'll probably leave a comment on the video if I don't see anybody else comment. I'll check after this.
important to note that I do not find that any game in this series is better than the other in terms of storytelling. In fact, I like the individual differences between these titles, especially when it comes to the concepts of individualism and freedom of choice. Elden Ring and Dark Souls 2 take the approach where it works as a core theme, whereas that lack of individualism works well in the cases of DS1 and 3. In many ways, Elden Ring evolves on the concepts established in Dark Souls 2. It is hard to ignore the player's purpose and agency that both games showcase. I would have personally liked that theme to be a bit more overt in dialogue and character interactions in Elden Ring like it was in Dark Souls 2, but the endings really helped to drive home those concepts of that individual freedom very well.
That was weird.
It helped to drive home those concepts of that individual.
Oh, that was like probably a rendering thing. Yeah, okay.
Individual freedom very well. I am sure that Aldia would be very proud to see just how many options were available at the end of Elden Ring, for example. Feel free to let me know how you feel about the way rulership and individualism was handled in both titles in the comments, as well as what is your favorite ending and why. Thanks so much for watching. If you liked this video, please consider liking and subscribing to the channel. I appreciate you taking the time to check out this video and the channel, as well as sharing your thoughts in the comments below. Discourse and feedback is encouraged and welcome. And as a final side note, I would just like to call attention to the video done by Sinclair Lore and the Knight of the Orchards channel that discussed the idea of kingship in Dark Souls 2. That video served as the foundation for many of the ideas sparked when creating this video, so I highly recommend checking out both of those channels and that specific video, which I will link in the description below. Thank you again, and I will catch you all in the next one very soon. Take care.
So yeah, I liked this video quite a bit, despite having some pretty, major disagreements at points.
Then, shall we?
And with there being like a little bit of, shaky ground for some of the arguments. Nonetheless, I do think it's fun to...
My fair consort.
Sorry, my stuttering just distracted me. I think it's fun to look at videos which take more thematic lenses to the games, because we do have a lot less of that, because there's a lot of ground to cover with the basics and the item descriptions. So it is fun to pull back once again and get more videos like this. So I'm going to go ahead and give him a like, and I will copy and share the link to this video in the chat with you guys. And then I will also check Level T's comment section and leave him one if nobody else says anything about Kath. All right, I don't see anything super recent or super upvoted about Kath, so that's a pretty good bit of feedback, I think, to leave him. Hey man, I liked the video and reacted to it live on my channels. Live on stream on my channel. A couple things. A couple bits of feedback for you. As far as the PC's individual choices go, I'm a little confused why you felt as though there was less agency in DS1 and 3 in particular. I know you mentioned being manipulated by serpents and whatnot, but for what it's worth, you can still become the Lord of the Dark without ever meeting Koth. And Dash, you can just walk away. And in DS3, I feel like the stomp ending is the quintessential ending for I don't know how do I want to phrase this. I feel like the stomp ending is the most symbolic of one choosing their own fate. The world be damned. Was there anything else that I wanted to say? I can't remember. Drew Wing likes the idea that the outer gods are just the elements of nature that have been discarded from the ring but refuse to disappear. I feel like I have some thoughts about that, but I just can't think of what they are now. Galamoth thinks that Marika is summoning the Elden Beast in the trailer. I feel like that is contingent upon whether or not one thinks what she's pulling out is from the meteor that the Elden Beast arrived in, and or whether or not the ring precedes the beast or the beast became the ring would probably be something else to consider. Tyrion thinks where Marika is holding the golden strings is inside of the tree, a portal exit to Lane Dell where we fight Radagon, the beast and her. It's the other end of the inside of the tree. If you look at the Mesmer Siege, it's toward outwards of the Lane Dell capital. So Mesmer Siege is not in Lane Dell or the lands between. It definitely seems to be in the Shadowlands. That did remind me that there was something that I did want to mention in regard to the trailer. So maybe after I check out Level T's next video, I will look at the trailer again and mention some more of my thoughts, which evolved a bit since the last stream. I talked about them briefly on the Discord, but it's like nothing too crazy. Okay. So what was I going to do? All right, I'll just leave that. I feel like I should say something else, like good luck with the channel, but whatever. Okay, so let's go ahead and check out the next one with The Pursuit of Knowledge, Cruelty and Failure of Knowledge. All right, so it sounds like the NPCs are going to be a bit loud, so I'm going to turn down the video audio for you guys slightly until I hear their audio, like their voice audio. Welcome into the stream, Inzano Zulu. It makes no sense in the timeline, but you couldn't help but question the use of a seduction, betrayal, and affair in the opening. It made you think, wait, was Radagon banging somebody else? So as far as the term that's used for seduction in Japanese is concerned, it's yuwaku, which can mean seduction, but it's kind of a bit more disambiguated and is probably closer to just temptation in English. So as to what that kind of temptation was, I feel like that opens other avenues of interpretation, because one can become tempted by power, not necessarily by like lust or sex or anything like that. So I think that might be worth consideration as well. No, it's potentially not banging, Hilka. And nice to see you again. All right, so let's go into the video.
I knew you'd come to stand before the Elden Ring, to become Elden Lord. No one has come this far, not for a very long while. The pursuit of knowledge is without end, for knowledge is never a thing complete. Perhaps the same could be said of guidance. Who's to say whether we'll remain who we are once the fight is finished? I sought to shed the yoke of fate, but failed. How vexing that the all-knowing didn't have the full story.
I told the all-hearing brute that I possess no such medallion. Or have you come to take more from me? Was my other half not enough?
Queen Marika has high hopes for us, that we continue to struggle unto eternity. I lost everything, but remain here patiently. I must learn all that can be taken from this place and sear it into my memory. How could I call myself the all-knowing if I did any less?
Knowledge is unending, knowledge is freedom, and knowledge is power. The quest for knowledge can be a tantalizing pursuit, especially when the greatest mysteries and unknowns supposedly lie on the horizon. Knowledge can drift outside the confines of sorcery or faith in order to explore new territory and findings. There are scholars of a specific kind who go against the grain of the common schools of learning in search of something new and different and potentially more vital than what established schools of magic or practices of faith can offer. The endless pursuit of knowledge is often met with great struggle, persistence, and unfortunately requires cruelty to push towards the answers to these great questions. The allure of further knowledge drives some to horrific acts under the guise of academic and righteous ideals. Knowledge comes at a price. The lives of many are used or sacrificed in order to further one's own research and experiments. The victims of these pursuits are left unknown to the rest of the world. If these victims aren't among the lost, then their suffering continues behind iron bars of a cage as an amalgamation of their former selves, prodded and dissected in the search for answers. Further knowledge often leads to corruption of one's own form or ideals. One might find themselves a shell of who they once were, or have long since abandoned their original moral values. The pursuits of both Gideon Ofnir, the All-Knowing, and Aldea, Scholar of the First Sin, were failures in the never-ending search for the biggest mysteries of the lands between and Drang Leg. These two not only represent the price of knowledge with their failures, but its futility. The knowledge is never a thing complete, for a lie will always remain a lie. Hi everyone.
All right, chat. I just had a bit of an existential crisis when looking at the intro of this video, because it just kind of made me think of something in relation to like the titles of characters in Elden Ring. So, why have I always been so quick to dismiss that Gideon is the so-called all-knowing when his boss title calls him Gideon the All-Knowing? Maybe it has been a bit hypocritical of me to insist that Godfrey is and has always been the legitimate first Elden Lord if I can dismiss Gideon being called all-knowing in his boss title plate. Granted, I do think that there's a bit more support for Godfrey being called the first Elden Lord, because I don't necessarily think it's talking about him in a titular way in multiple item descriptions. But Gideon is also called all-knowing in his item descriptions, but it does seem to be clearer to me that it's a title. So I might need to reconsider how stringent I've been on that front specifically. But man, I really don't want to have to do that. Like, if there's going to be another Elden Lord before Godfrey, I'm still going to be really upset and riot. So... yeah, I know that doesn't necessarily talk directly to this level tease video here right now, which I apologize for. But another thought that I did actually have in relation to the video is like, ooh, if we're talking about science stuff, I'm a little bit disappointed we can't bring up like some cool other villains by just like limiting it to like Dark Souls 2. So like I think some of the coolest villains that are like super scientist tropes would be like Orochi from Naruto, a little bit of like Mayuri from like Bleach. I guess he's not a villain, kind of, question mark. You guys know what I mean if you've seen Bleach though. And yeah, just the idea of the pursuit of knowledge for knowledge's sake is just kind of always been an attractive thing. Aldea does a really good job of kind of representing that trope in DS2. I really liked Sage Frake in Demon Souls for that. And I think the imposter Yosefka in Bloodborne is really good. And even like the Healing Church in general is just kind of like a good fleshing out of that kind of ideology where the pursuit of higher knowledge can come at the detriment of one's humanity and might tie into the overall themes of this video. First, people are making videos about Godfrey. Now I'm rethinking Gideon. DLC madness is strange. Don't get me wrong. I still don't believe Gideon is all-knowing because he's like factually incorrect at places. So that's partly why I don't necessarily believe his title. But the fact that I can dismiss his title should probably poke a hole in my ideas about Godfrey being the legitimate bona fide first Elden Lord, despite Placidus Axis stuff still just being hearsay. I guess there might be more room for argument as much as I disdain it. Yeah, as Ponyboy says, Mayuri is a villain that's on the payroll of the good guys, but he might not necessarily be an antagonist. That might be the difference there. Fair enough. Scaleezy says, and I thank you for numbering them, by the way. People really love that Aldia quote about lies when it's an appeal to nature fallacy. His entire point is humanity's current form is a falsity, which you would counter that being the hollow true form of man would totally suck. So, you're wrong. Anyway, the reason why I say you're wrong is that I would disagree that being the hollow is the true form of man, and it's the humanity sprite, and it's the hollow form, which is the falsity, because people as darkness sprites became attached to what they thought of themselves as the hollow meat vessels. But of course, that's very arguable. So me saying you're wrong was just kind of like more comedic than anything.
And welcome back to the Elden Ring is Dark Souls 2 series. When looking at the themes of knowledge and the pursuit of it, Dark Souls 2 and Elden Ring have very similar outlooks on the subject separate from other titles. It is worth noting that the pursuit of knowledge is a common motif in all of these games, but Elden Ring and DS2 have distinct similarities with one another in my view. It's worth noting that the knowledge spoken in this video refers to knowledge of the world and its pressing issues, and not within the schools of study like faith or sorcery. The scholar motif is a similar...
Oh snap, we got Level T in the chat. That's great. Oh, so you might have just gotten my comment notification. Yeah, we just finished your... I'm assuming it might have been a second video, but it didn't... on your channel, I didn't see them numbered or anything. So I noticed the other video came out like a month ago, and this one was only 2 weeks ago. So I'm sorry if I missed the first one. Oh, okay. Yeah, that's definitely on me. I hate the For You section, because what I did originally, I clicked this one, or no, maybe it was, I don't remember what I did, but I should have gone to at your full videos. I just kind of strung it together 5 minutes before I streamed. I was pretty disorganized today. So yeah, I'm glad to have you in the chat. So yeah, we want a lore fight. Level T, if you're unfamiliar with my channel, I like to make lore videos myself, and in the between times of making these really long drawn out videos, which take a lot of time to do, I want to keep my community active and following my content. And so I've been on a journey of looking at a bunch of other lore tubers' creations and kind of bouncing my ideas off of what they present, trying to critically examine what they say, see if what they say is consistent and what I can appreciate or learn about their perspectives. Even if I do have disagreements at times, I think it's just a good part of the journey. And throughout doing this, I've actually come into contact with a bunch of creators, and I think the overall level of discourse has been improving, and we're becoming more of an actual community rather than these kind of disparate islands of thought, which I think is really great. So glad to have you here.
Presentation in both games, in that there are prominent figures in the form of Aldia and Gideon that ponder the greater meaning of existence and seek to tackle the world's issues with a more academic perspective. It is often regarded that Elden Ring is Dark Souls 2 too, so we are bringing the discussion to how both games similarly handle knowledge and the pursuit of it at the cost of others, and the failures that come with this never-ending endeavor.
So I'm going to do a little bit something unorthodox and do a quick video search to see if you talk about an idea that I'm having right now. Okay, I don't think you are, which is perfectly fine here. You don't need to. So, all right. Thinking about the context of Gideon as the so-called academic of Elden Ring is perfectly fine, but I wonder if there's actually somebody who's a bit more of an academic in Celovus. despite Salavis's kind of limited time in the lands between when we are there. I wonder if he is more immoral than Gideon and therefore kind of like a truer pursuer of science to a certain degree, like, you know, pseudoscience or like whatever, to knowledge, I guess, if he's willing to cross some taboos. Although now that I think about it, I don't think... Would it really be beyond Gideon to make puppets? I feel like he essentially treats everybody else like puppets, just he doesn't necessarily feel it necessary to remove their own volition. Because he just uses people as tools, which are akin to puppets, but he did associate with Salavis, and he might have known about Salavis's proclivities and maybe dabbled for a while, but then Salavis did something to piss him off. I don't know. How do you guys feel about that, chat? Like, do you think Salavis could be like a bigger tragic academic type figure than Gideon to an extent? Kyle thinks Gideon seems more like the master spy knowledge type. Doesn't he have men out there somewhere watching? Isn't that why he has an eye symbol or something? Yes. A pox upon both their houses. Well said, true connoisseur. Living up to your name. Okimin says, you think Heath just thinks puppets are gross and not a meaningful pursuit. He seems to think of turning Nepheli into puppet as a waste. Yeah, but that's the thing. He doesn't necessarily seem to condemn us morally. He thinks it's a waste because he looks at her as like a tool that can be used rather than a puppet that can be used. Like, he probably sees more utility in her not being a puppet, which might be the only reason he didn't like do it, is kind of what I'm thinking. Okiman thinks of Salavis as more of a hobbyist than anything. He's definitely more of a prick. Got him, Jonah. Salavis is just interested in his little habits and is not interested in the world as a whole. You know what? That's a fair point. Yeah, that's a fair point. Kyle never thought Gideon was smart. He just knows what people tell him. I mean, that's kind of part of just collecting info. You don't necessarily have to be smart to be knowledgeable. Chadwick says, Gideon calls, he actually calls Salavis a dolly botherer. And is that a reference to our usage of dolls or Dolores specifically? I'm assuming the dolls. I should probably like double check the Japanese on that, but yeah. Salavis doesn't seem to thirst for knowledge in the same way Gideon does. Okay, yeah, that's fair. THDL, I believe you were on stream yesterday or something like that, so welcome back. But if I'm misremembering, welcome to the stream. You could argue America's a deep scholar, pluming the depths of the Golden Order and all the ancient tablets in her bedchamber. True. So is Radagon the true academic? Correct, Chadwick, but he calls Salavis a dolly botherer, not us. Artificial Pixel, welcome on in. Catching up on all of the live streams and saw I was live. Have I touched on the Deathbed Companions? America may be... Oh, do you mean in relation to the DLC stuff? And then you said, America may be in the dream of the woman in the portrait stealing Mesmer, your theory. Love the videos. Thank you so much. I appreciate that. So I actually do have a video on Fia and the Deathbed Companions that has like no views. Because, you know, algorithm be like, no. And I'm like, you got me. So yeah, I do have one video on Fia and the Deathbed Companions. I know I've touched upon what I believe is like the significance of Fia in many streams throughout my live streams, but if you're catching up, it's totally understandable why you might not be familiar with that. And I guess I really haven't talked a lot about her and all that stuff super recently either. But good question. Yeah, I don't know about the origins of the Deathbed Companions. And some people, I do know somebody somewhere has floated the idea that there could be like a Deathbed-esque connection between what's going on with the woman in the portrait and whatnot. I just don't know when they first came into being. I feel like Deathbed Companions would have arisen as a consequence of like the Erdtree and Erdtree burial and could have been one way to subvert it. So if they're pre-Erdtree, that might be a possibility, but I just don't know. Jackson Weiss, welcome on in. Joel Lord, welcome. ER's got quite a few academics. Don't forget about Selin, Roger, and Mikola. Actually, Selin's probably might be one of the better examples, if not the best. Because she doesn't really give a damn about morality. She wants that truth with a capital T. But but maybe it's because her focus is so narrow-minded that the Gideon comparison isn't as apt. Good points, though. Zano doesn't feel like Radigan is the deep scholar, but you think there's too much missing knowledge. He comes across as more sympathetic to you. Wrong choices maybe, but driven by rational passion. Interesting. What about Tops? He's a Bluntstone. I don't think about it. Level T says this video focuses on knowledge as it pertains to understanding of the world and not sorcery or faith, if that helps to clear that up. That's mentioned towards the start of the intro. No, I get that. I don't mean to necessarily like derail your video. I was just like, because of you mentioning it this way, I was just like trying to think about other aspects of knowledge as it gets related to Elden Ring specifically. So yeah, appreciate that. Okay, going back to the video.
Aldia is known as the Scholar of the First Sin in Dark Souls 2. His life's work was the study of humanity and the First Flame. Aldia sought the answers of what the world would be without the cycle of light and dark. He often refers to this dilemma of the world being caught in this cycle as, quote, the yoke of fate. Aldia's pursuit for the secrets of life and to greater extent the world led him to begin studying the undead curse. His methods were often cruel and punishing, which forced a falling out between him and his brother Vendrick, the ruler of Drang Lake. Under seclusion in his manor, Aldia would begin to continue experimenting on humans that were invited as suggested by the description of the Spitfire spear.
So I don't disagree with anything that's said here, but I think I would switch or shift the perspective slightly. And it's kind of hard to do it because they're all interconnected. But rather than just focusing on darkness and fire, I would make the argument that Aldia was focused on life, which is obviously intrinsically linked to both fire and darkness in Dark Souls 2 and whatnot. And I believe his and Vendrick's motive was to overcome that undead curse, and the way to overcome that curse would be to first understand life, so that way they could kind of get that eternal life without reverting into like the hollow state, or regressing into a hollow state perhaps. Maybe there's deteriorating into a hollow state. That might be the better word here. Oh, your wows were at the Tops disrespect. I was quoting Tops himself. Just as a flippant joke.
In addition,
hey, Mercy.
creations such as the Northern and Southern ritual bands were created through experiments on people of this very nature. These experiments often left these people malformed or dead. Many of the manor's inhabitants are caged creatures, suggesting that Aldia had turned these people into monstrosities such as the enhanced undead and the ogres, to name a few. He also managed to create a dragon similar to the everlasting dragons, which were the immortal beings that existed before the first age of fire during the events set before DS1. The dragon can be found at the top of the Dragon Eyrie and is merely playing a part of a dragon, or is referred to as a false deity according to Shalquar and Nashandra's dialogue. This false dragon represents the pinnacle of what Aldia was able to create with the cruel work he was doing in his manor alongside his acolytes. It was some time after that Aldia himself had transformed into a monster himself. Much like the ones he created, he could not revert to his original form. He seems to only appear at bonfires, suggesting that he might be linked to them in some way or as a physical manifestation of them. He has the appearance.
So for what it's worth, the some way could potentially be... Sorry, I should finish your sentence. The way in which he could be linked to the bonfires, more specifically, might just be something that's intrinsic to all of those who would go hollow via the dark sign, because the homeward spells of, I don't remember which one from like the 3 games, they mentioned that the spell would normally take one to their homeland, but for the undead, the hollows, it links them back to the bonfires. So it seems to be something inherent to all of those who would go hollow, because they've been branded by the dark sign and fire and whatnot. Can't disrespect little Aldia, yeah. And so I do have more I want to say, but I want to back it up a little bit and then finish the rest of his point.
It was some time after that Aldia himself had transformed into a monster himself. Much like the ones he created, he could not revert to his original form. He seems to only appear at bonfires, suggesting that he might be linked to them in some way or as a physical manifestation of them. He has the appearance of a withered and burnt tree with roots that can be controlled like tentacles. He is often on fire too, suggesting a link to the bonfires and the curse of light and dark. This all culminated in an ironic failure for Aldia. He sought to better understand the undead curse and humanity, but ultimately failed to shed the yoke of fate. His failure resulted in his body becoming disfigured from his original form, much like his victims. Knowledge, in this case, is presented as a search for answers at the cost of others, and the results leading to failure. Aldia's cruel work left him empty-handed by the events of Dark Souls 2. There are some questions that will forever be left unanswered and understood, and Aldia's failure to accept this natural aspect of life resulted in his failure as a scholar of the first sin. The problem with knowledge is that one cannot understand everything, and the pursuit to understand everything leads to one's demise, especially when dealing with grand concepts such as the true essence or purpose of humanity. When Aldia
And that's a pretty consistent FromSoft trope, because you have, what's his face? Not Oswald, oh my god, Orbeck of Vinheim in Dark Souls 3, who just kind of gives up on life when he attains the knowledge he seeks. That is also shared with Topes in Elden Ring, which it's super annoying to me that he just like goes the Orbeck of Vinheim route. He could have just been like a shopkeeper, I guess, but FromSoft is like, nah, he dead. So, right. I do have some more notes that I want to get to at some point, but I also want him to like finish his points here, because I'm not sure how directly these are going to tie into it. And this isn't necessarily to contradict anything that Level T has said so far. This is these notes would be more particularly to give a bit more context and all that into what I believe Aldia's experiments were dealing with. We need to stop working on the lore or we'll turn into a monster thing? Who says we aren't, Pigsy? Inzano says, this makes them wonder if Vendrick would have ended up as obsessive as Aldia if he wasn't busy being king. But maybe that's the point, since they're brothers, aka points of comparison to each other. I think the difference with Vendrick more specifically is that Nashandra literally began to cloud his sight. Vendrick does have like a throwaway line where he sees very little anymore these days, despite him like kind of already being a big old hollow beef jerky man. His spirit doesn't see anything anymore. He's kind of afraid of Nashandra, but he loves her. He can't let her go. So he's kind of stuck in this purgatory of not being able to make a choice, which is why he's ultimately a failure as a king, which is hinted in the Shield of Want in Dark Souls 3, I believe.
Meets and guides the bearer of the curse during their journey, he often subjects them to long-winded bouts of philosophy and rhetorical questions. Questions such as, what is a king? What do you seek? Do we intend to shed the yoke of fate? And what do we want truly for the world and its future? Aldia's approach to knowledge after his failure is one more of curiosity that is projected onto the bearer of the curse. He sees the bearer as the one likely to find the answers that he could not. He accepts that his knowledge drove him to lose everything, leaving him with only one thing to do: wait for the answers. Aldia's cruelty led him to somewhat of a better understanding, but not to the true answers of the world, the cycle of light and dark, and the undead curse. Through the bearer of the
Yeah, so I think Aldia did come to that understanding, but I feel like Aldia felt as though he himself couldn't make that choice because he felt it might have been beyond his authority to make that choice, which is why he relies on somebody else to make it for him. And that somebody else may have been originally supposed to have been Vendrick, who was going to be the Lord, but then Vendrick essentially abdicated his throne, or if not the throne, his responsibilities.
Curse's actions. Depending on which path they choose, Aldia would begin to witness what answers might lie ahead for the world and humanity if the bearer chose to forge their own path outside the confines of light and dark. Aldia's humility towards his failures shows some potential remorse or acknowledgement for his wrongdoing through his work. Aldia takes interest in the bearer of the curse as an experiment or test of his own to see if the true answers could be found within this, quote, young hollow's actions. All he can do is simply wait, since every option he implemented was unsuccessful. Knowledge or understanding begins with the recognition of one's own ignorance, as another renowned scholar once said. A similar scholar or learned individual can be found in the lands between in Elden Ring. Gideon Ofnir, the all-knowing, much like Aldia, seeks the knowledge no one dares to uncover or comprehend. As indicated by the all-knowing scepter, Gideon's weapon, it depicts a hand grasping a pearl. The pearl represents the world, while the hand represents the all-knowing's grasping for it. The same pearl is adorned with an eye, suggesting the many forms of knowledge according to the weapon description. Knowledge in this case, again, is outside of the schools of magic and faith, and instead leans more into unraveling the mysteries of the world and its major conflicts. Gideon, like the player, is a Tarnished seeking to become Elden Lord, and also manages the Round Table Hold, the place of refuge for those who are tarnished in the lands between. We can usually find him in his study, reading over hundreds of tomes stacked throughout the room. Once the Tarnished has proven their worth to become a full member of the Round Table, Gideon will divulge his personal goals and aims. He seeks to become Elden Lord and become all-knowing, hence his obsession of acquiring information through the player's actions and intel, in addition to his many spies and agents. The Tarnished throughout their journey can gather intel for Gideon in exchange for incantations and other powerful spells. He initially aims to work together with the Tarnished despite being in competition with them. He has a particular fixation on Miquella, stating that he still remains a mystery to even him, the All-Knowing. Gideon especially appreciates intel on Miquella in particular. Besides claiming the part, Gideon's entire appearance reflects his obsession for knowledge, with his armor, which is adorned with eyes and ears, representing how he acquires information himself or through his associates like Ensha and Henricus. Gideon, much like Aldia, displays cruelty in the pursuit of knowledge of the lands between and its current conflict. The most glaring example of his cruelty is the ransacking of the Albinoric village in Liurnia. He sought the halves of the Erdtree medallion in order to gain access to Elphael and the mysteries within. Miquella is of particular interest to Gideon, suggesting that finding Miquella might be his prime motivation for wanting access to the Erdtree and Elphael. The Albinorics were completely slaughtered by his agents, including an omen killer in his service. There was only one surviving Albinoric sane enough to speak, known as Albus. He only managed to survive because he was disguised as a pot, possibly with something similar to the Mimic's veil. As his dialogue states, the village is finished. A village that operated as a safe haven for the Albinorics, who are considered subhuman in the lands between, was leveled to the ground at the command of Gideon. He preys upon the weakest in order to gain knowledge or information to aid his own selfish intentions. Much of his knowledge is done through others doing his dirty work for him. The player even finds themselves under similar employment. Much like Aldia, the disposal of life is of little concern to him. Knowledge takes precedence over everything else. Gideon and Ensha also managed to interrogate Latenna, an Albinoric woman who they believed to possess the medallion.
So I don't disagree with the characterization of Aldia and Gideon so far, but I do think there is kind of some important context to Aldia's motivations for anybody who might not be too familiar with Dark Souls 2 that they might want to know about in relation to this video. So in Dark Souls 2, if you are an undead being, you'll eventually lose your mind and go hollow, which essentially just makes you like a zombie for all intents and purposes. So Aldia and Vendrick sought to stop this kind of zombification of literally everybody in the land when the fire started to fade. And one way to do that would be to potentially like link the fire and seemingly reset the cycle. But since Vendrick didn't make that choice and whatnot, they were trying to come up with a second way, a third path, in which they didn't need to embrace fire or darkness, but could still overcome the undead curse. So for Aldia, it's certainly still kind of an immoral thing, the way that he wantonly experimented on all manner of life and created all manner of abominations. But as they say, the pathway to hell is paved with good intentions. His ultimate reason for doing that stuff was still for the greater good and may not have been entirely in the pursuit of knowledge for the sake of knowledge, but there did seem to be like an actual goal or proverbial light at the end of his tunnel there. And hey, 2Hit, welcome back to the stream. You're unconvinced that Gideon ever wanted to actually be Elden Lord? I'm pretty confident he did originally, and then he had a change of heart. But I don't think it is ever fully spelled out, to be fair. He's basically America's version of the KGB. Without Horn says, oh yeah, I had another question about Lothric earlier. I think I lost it in the sauce there. Oh yeah, 2Hit asked, if you remember correctly, isn't Aldia's school of thought about the cycle of light and dark what ultimately informed Lothric's choice in Dark Souls 3? Yes, and with that being said, I know many people don't believe that Lothric linked the fire, but in order to become a Lord of Cinder, one needs to have linked the fire. So Lothric originally linked the fire, but then when he came back, he's like, no, I tried that. This system doesn't work. I'm not going to go back to my throne. And I'm not going to let you take my cinders because it doesn't mean anything anymore. So you can die and rest here if you like. But anyway, then Without Horn said, you feel like Aldia wouldn't have approved of Lothric just kind of standing by waiting for the flame to fade, but you're not super familiar with the S3. Okay, so yeah, like I was just saying, Lothric did link initially, and at least with Dark Souls 2, Aldia didn't exactly seem to have a particular attachment to either choice. He just felt as though the one who had the strength to make that choice had the right to make that choice, and he would have just kind of like stuck by it. So Aldia didn't feel as though he can make that choice himself. 2Hit says, you thought Lothric refused to link, and that's why the Unkindled started popping up. So yeah, that is probably one of the most common theories, especially because Emma, is her name Emma? The little old lady at the bottom of Lothric Castle. I think it's Emma. She says, like, you need to go back and make Lothric a true lord. But the way that I interpret those lines, and this isn't necessarily like a linguistic thing, it's that she's saying you need to make him fulfill his lordly duty of being returned to the thrones. And if you go back to Firelink Shrine, you do have that fifth throne of Lothric and Lorien having, been the Lords of Cinders. And it's pretty explicit that Lords of Cinders had to have linked, and when you do kill Lothric and Lorien, the Lord of Cinder text does appear on screen. Oh no, Galamoth will become Sheldon Lord and usher in the Age of Bazinga. Ooh wee mama. Or is it Zooey mama? Zowie mama? I don't know. Drew Wang says, one of the last things Gideon says in the Erdtree is, who's to say whether we'll remain who we are once the fight is finished? What do you think, as one who aspires to become Elden Lord? That's true. I remember thinking a lot about that a couple months back, but I couldn't really do anything with that information, so I kind of forgot about it. But now, with the context of the DLC at hand, that makes me Pepe Ofnir over here. I'm going to have to ignore that for now, just so I don't, explode my mind for the rest of the stream. Yeah, you wonder if he's scared of some sort of fundamental change that occurs to an Elden Lord. Could that have happened to Radagon after he became Elden Lord? I know we're told that Hoarah became Godfrey when he took Sarash upon his back. We don't know when that was exactly, but he said that's when it said that's when he vowed to become a lord, which would imply it must have been before he was a lord. So, yeah, that's a good point. Damn you for bringing this up. No, but I do appreciate that. It's going to bother me.
The interrogation resulted in the death of Lobo, Latenna's wolf, or quote, other half. Albinoric women are tied to their wolves both emotionally and physically since they cannot walk and often ride them to move around, so losing Lobo was like losing a part of herself. Gideon's adopted daughter Nefeli Lu, a warrior from the Badlands, learns of Gideon's genocide of the Albinorics and is disowned when she argues against his actions. She states, "My father cast me out for indulging my emotions, forgetting the mission. Punishment for offing his pawns. Father, rather Lord Gideon, has offered me guidance all my life. I would have done anything for him, to place him on the throne of Elden Lord. And yet I, though it was not my intent, I betrayed him. I can no longer trust in Father, to think he'd order his men to enact such tragedy. Where is the justice he purports in that? He wants..."
Hell yeah. Speaking of where's the justice, Jay Dixon says, Quaylog just got her channel back, by the way. Hell yeah. All right, I'm glad. So if anybody in chat knows of Quaylog and didn't hear this news, her channel got hacked and was kind of like replaced by this fake-ass Tesla live channel. So if you suddenly got an influx of Tesla recommended videos, it may have been because you were subscribed to Quaylog and you might have unknowingly unsubscribed or clicked an option like I did of don't recommend channel to me anymore. And so I don't know what I can do to fix that. Maybe I should just unsub and resub. Maybe that would help. Maybe I just need to watch another video by her to like fix that. But yeah, thanks so much for the news, Jay Dixon. Oh yeah, and then Okuman does ask a really good question. Jay, do you know if Quaylog's videos have been like fully restored and stuff? Because they got purged. All right.
Told me that if he became Elden Lord, he would never allow the downtrodden to be cheated ever again. Was he simply lying to me? How could I say that? Father has always given me his guidance, and now I've lost it.
All right, I'm going to go back in the video because I just remembered that I actually have the internet, even though I'm on stream, and I can actually look up my damn question myself. So I apologize to Level T. This is, it's still kind of messed up. But it does say Quaylog now, but her channel tag still has @TeslaLive24. So she might need to like fix it. So hopefully that fixes that. All right, so it's still pretty messed up, but she might have just gotten back control of it. Hopefully, like YouTube can auto fix the videos. So yeah, this is still pretty messed up. Okay. Damn. Okay, let me back up the video a bit more because I don't want to just trash this guy's points. Okay, this should be pretty good, I think. She had to change her name to Quaylog _ instead of Quaylog, unfortunately. Damn. Man, that's so messed up. It sucks.
Father cast me out for indulging my emotions, forgetting the mission. Punishment for offing his pawns. Father, rather Lord Gideon, has offered me guidance all my life. I would have done anything for him, to place him on the throne of Elden Lord. And yet I, though it was not my intent, I betrayed him. I can no longer trust in Father, to think he'd order his men to enact such tragedy. Where is the justice he purports in that? He once told me that if he became Elden Lord, he he would never allow the downtrodden to be cheated ever again. Was he simply lying to me? How could I say that? Father has always given me his guidance, and now I've lost it. Nefeli's sorrow indicates how Gideon treats those in his service. They are discarded once they have exhausted their usefulness or have gone against his views or aims. Nefeli's dialogue here also suggests that he might have had pure intentions at one point until his continued consumption of knowledge ate away at his morals. Much like in the case of Aldea, knowledge comes at a price, and to delve deeper, greater sacrifices must be made in order to continue the endless pursuit. The original intentions of knowledge might be to aid or to help others and the world at large, but ultimately this path often leads to corruption, greed, and violent acts. The final interaction with Gideon is a duel at the Erdtree Sanctuary in Leyndell, now covered in ash. Gideon gloats with that iconic pose that he knew that the Tarnished was coming, and that he states that Marika wants the Tarnished to continue to struggle for eternity. This revelation shared by Gideon suggests that he believes that he knows the truths of the world and what the future might hold. This is further reinforced by his armor description that states, "Armor set with countless eyes and ears, worn by Gideon Ofnir, the All-Knowing. Knowledge begins with the recognition of one's own ignorance, the realization that the search for knowledge is unending." But when Gideon glimpsed into the will of Queen Marika, he shuddered in fear at the end that should not be. The end.
It's kind of funny because when I see the statue, I get surprised because I've been on such an older version of Elden Ring that this thing still isn't in my roundtable hold.
That should not be could have different interpretations on what exactly that is or entails. For the purpose of this video and the themes of knowledge and its fruitless pursuits, this could mean that there is literally no ending to the ongoing struggle of the Tarnished, the demigods, and the stasis of the lands between. With this view in mind, Gideon perhaps received a revelation that there could be no possible resolution to the conflict the Tarnished seek to mend by becoming Elden Lord. He might be suggesting that nobody can become Elden Lord. Much like the knowledge and its pursuit, the supposed continued struggle Marika desires would be endless. Much like the cycles of light and dark, this glimpse that Gideon had could be a never-ending loop, leaving him fearful that no fix to the troubles of the lands between could be achieved. Progress would be forever in a stalemate. This dialogue from Gideon plays on the irony and hubris of knowledge, suggesting that knowledge can never be fully complete or known. He forgets his own words and purpose as scholar of everything possible in the lands between. Here he thinks he has found the answer, and that there could only be one answer. His resurrection, and by greater extension, the resurrection of all Tarnished and life in the lands between, could be one cruel joke to keep the world and the order as is for eternity. He assumes.
So yeah, like mentioning the idea of resurrection, I think would really help characterize why Gideon would come to the conclusion that he did, so that because the Tarnished are kind of forced to revive over and over, and if they're pitted up against a god which Gideon believes to be infallible, then the kind of logical conclusion one could come to that would be that we are meant to struggle against that god for eternity, or just struggle in general for eternity. But I think this is because of Gideon's shortcoming for assuming that the god was infallible to begin with. And I don't know whether or not that's because Gideon's title is just like self-proclaimed in that he's not really all-knowing and he jumps to conclusions and just kind of like sticks with them, versus truly kind of believing in that struggle for eternity because that was the will of Marika. I think it's probably just a little bit of both, like not having that full picture, just like he didn't have that full picture with Mikola, just like how he believed Ranni would have had a great rune, which for anybody who's unfamiliar with my channel, I strongly argue against, because Ranni should have died before the ring was shattered and therefore shouldn't have gotten a great rune that way. or at least she wouldn't have had a great rune before she discarded her flesh, as Gideon believes. Although I do know some people would argue, even though Ranni died in body, she may have tried to get a great rune after the fact in her spectral form, her doll form. But if so, we don't have any evidence for her attaining a rune. And I know some people think like the moon has a rune, but I don't think there's enough evidence for me to fully buy it. So that's just kind of where I am on that topic. So nonetheless, Gideon does have deficits in his knowledge, which I think plays into his delusional state here. As to why he chooses to rebel against us who would be Elden Lord is anyone's guess, because like if he's certain that god couldn't die, then why the hell should he bother trying to defend it? Like, just let us die instead. So I do question even like Gideon's own proclamations here, that he knows in his bones that the god cannot die, because his armor set says that he feared at the end that should not be, and he wanted knowledge to continue eternally. And so I feared that in Gideon's mind, ending the age would mean ending knowledge of that age or something like that. And so he couldn't, like, the idea of that finality just didn't set well with him. So I think he actually did fear that the god could be killed by a tarnished. So yeah, that's just kind of like my read on it there. Yeah, and as Inzano says, he's obsessed with the pursuit of knowledge, and so he doesn't want it to end. So if the age ends, does that mean an end to Gideon, an end to his knowledge? He could just be like self-serving in this respect, which would go very well in line with his character being self-serving and manipulative of others for his interests. You never questioned that about Ranni before? Oh man, that's great. And Drew says, it's also weird that Morgott mentions her in the throne lineup. Just wait until we complain that he doesn't mention Mesmer anywhere in the coming months. Ash King says, Gideon is a lore seeker with headcanon who doesn't watch other people's theories and doesn't check the Japanese translations. A little bit. He probably just doesn't have access to those translations. But yeah, I appreciate the comment there. Pantheon asks, does anyone mention Gideon with his title? No, but we do have the item descriptions, but it could still be a self-proclaimed title, which might be like the way that I have always taken it, but maybe I should question my belief about other people's titles in relation to this. And yeah, it sounds like Quelaag's finally getting everything back under her belt, so that's pretty great. Ponyboy always assumed that Gideon was correct about an eternal struggle, and it was really more eternal until you overcome your limits, and that Gideon didn't think anyone could overcome the bar she set. I mean, I think that's pretty much the same thing. Same thing to what I was saying, but not like necessarily that. Nemo, welcome back in. Imagine an alternate universe where everything is the same, but everyone speaks Japanese. I don't know if I would necessarily enjoy that, because not to go off like too far on a tangent, but like the whole idea of one's language shaping the thoughts that they're even capable of having, I think is absolutely 100% true. So I think for whatever benefits would come from being able to share a language, actually there might be more benefits to that than having that kind of a divided thing. Because borders would be less meaningful if there's a shared language without like the whole dialect thing. Yeah, I'm just going to leave that alone because I will pontificate a bit too much. You just scared the hell out of me, Inzano, because I mute myself all the time and forget to unmute. I was like, oh no, not again.
Assumes rather than knows the fate of the Tarnished, and it is sealed with this glimpse into Marika's supposed will. His fear clouds his judgment and ultimately leads to his failure as the proclaimed all-knowing. His fear of the stagnation of the world is what leads him to attack us. He sees no other way out from this stasis. The end that should not be, or the yoke of fate, are not so different from one another. Aldea seeks to remove the world or humanity from the cycle, while Gideon fears the potential stasis the lands between could be in for eternity. Gideon fears the unknown in this case, while Aldea is curious about the potential unknowns in his own respective separate story. The concepts of the yoke of fate and the end that should not be are the results of a world in stasis or unending cycles. The inhabitants of these worlds are unable to progress beyond these points. Both scholars seek to answer these grand questions of the world only to be met with unknowns and commit horrific acts amounting to little. They are both failed scholars who took their research too far only to end up empty-handed when it came to understanding their worlds and their biggest problems. In a final attempt to deter the Tarnished from their goals, Gideon states that a man cannot kill a god, suggesting that the end or answers cannot be attained because the Elden Beast, and by greater extension the Greater Will, cannot be harmed or killed if Marika's will is supposedly to keep the state of the lands between as is. He sees this as a cruel joke to the Tarnished.
Yo, Level T, I will give you some cool jerry-rigging advice for getting like better camera angles. So I can tell that you're using the telescope because I've run into this issue for like the purposes of the trailer contest going on right now. So one thing you can do is actually use gestures to hide yourself from the camera. So if you use the prone gesture, you'll lie down on the ground, and then you can tilt the angle of your camera up to get better angles, or like more clear angles of things that you might have like other objects in the way with the telescope because of the zoom in. So I will actually show you this exact vantage point from the prone position because I was literally getting footage for this really recently. So point one, this is with the telescope, which you were using, and this is like perhaps a little bit too close for the purpose of my framing here, which is kind of what you had going on. And then here it is with me being prone. There I am. So yeah, that is like one tip you can use if you don't have the free camera mod, or if you're like working with console, something like that. And then another tip you can use is to do something like America's Mischief, so your character isn't as obvious, and or like put yourself against a wall and like use the sitting gesture. So a bit of a footage gathering tip there for higher production values.
And that their efforts have been for nothing. They have come this far only to be met with a fight against a literal god. To Gideon, this task is impossible, but what he forgets is that knowledge begins with one's own ignorance. This time it happens to be his own ignorance, by his assumption that immediately all is lost.
Cool, it seems like we're on the same page there.
Gideon fails to understand that anything is indeed possible, and that the outcomes are endless, or what he glimpsed was not actually Marika's true will. Aldea, by comparison, was able to recognize his own ignorance and let the bearer of the curse make the decision and work towards the mysteries of the world. Gideon, of course, was unable to resist. Much like Ensha, he got a bit ahead of himself. It is also possible that this revelation that struck fear into Gideon did not come from Marika, but actually Radagon, since he is the more likely of the two to want to repair the world and keep things relatively the same. After all, Marika and Radagon are the same person. Perhaps he mistook the revelation's true sender. This message...
Yeah, that's a pretty common theory. I don't know how I feel about that. I would kind of hate it if the item description could lie to us so inadvertently, because it would just make the item descriptions more... Damn it, I had the word a second ago, like doubtable. Anyway, yeah, if we begin to doubt item descriptions, as I've said like many times throughout my streams here, then I think it puts us on a slippery slope where we could begin to doubt any item's description, which makes it really hard to have agreements over the most basic facts of the lore, and just kind of makes discussions about the lore break down much more quickly, I feel. And then Bella asks Gideon lore video. You know what? Maybe that's a good idea. I might need to like look into Gideon videos specifically to see if anybody else has brought up the points that I have, because I don't really like to make videos on topics that I feel have already been covered well. But I mean, that also isn't necessarily like the best reason to not make a video, because people might want to hear my take even if it's similar to somebody else's. Yeah, I'll think about that, because there's a little bit of time before like the DLC comes out, and talking about Gideon specifically really isn't going to get in the way of that, I think. And then Jonah says, why do you have to kill the Elden Beast to become Elden Lord? Because he's in the way. The FromSoft staple. Level T said, no idea this was a thing. Thanks for the tip. You're doing all your footage through Xbox captures, so you can only do so much, but that definitely helps. Understandable. And then, yeah, the other higher production value tip that I have would be to just do it without the HUD. You've actually already done a really good job with your audio, especially if you're using a console. But if you want to up the game ever so slightly, like I noticed on the Lobo Latenna stuff, you had the sound effects in the background. And this is going to be a real pain in the ass. Oh, damn. And if you're on console, this makes it even worse. Okay. Damn, all of your footage is through console? I'm really impressed that you already have like this much and you're not using more like B-roll. So anyway, going back to my other audio tip would be go into your settings and then turn down all the music all the way and turn down the SFX all the way, and then orient your camera towards the thing that's talking. And then you could have that be your default audio clip if you're not getting direct audio rips online, which is, the smartest thing to do. But if you want to do it that way, you'll get like the crispest stuff. And then you would want a second take for your camera to be oriented on the speaker. And this is another tip, and it's a real pain in the ass to actually implement, but I will try to show it off for you. You can actually still kind of pull out your telescope when you're talking to some NPCs. So you need to be pretty quick about it. I assume it would still work on console, but here you go if you don't have like access to the camera mod.
What the hell is wrong with you? You're trying to start some piss off. What the hell is wrong with you? You're trying to start.
This is me failing to pull out the telescope.
What the hell is wrong with you? You're trying to start piss off.
Still failing. It's kind of hard to get the timing right, because if you do it too fast, nothing happens, and if you do it too slow, nothing happens. That was too fast. Too fast.
What the hell is wrong with you?
Too slow.
Piss off.
To be fair, this is like the first time I did it in a really, really long time, so it took me a minute. I'll get it eventually. I just don't remember when I do it. And then the other thing to note is that if you're having issues getting an NPC's dialogue with the framing that you want, you can walk away from most conversations and they'll repeat what they said as though you'd never talked to them in that instance.
Trying to stop piss off.
And as for Ash King's question, I think of Hugh's Curse is kind of similar to like the Sword Seals and the Scar Seal stuff, or even like the Fire Giant. I'm gonna zoom in. Okay, I did it. Here we go.
What the hell is wrong with you? You're trying to start something. Piss off before I crack you in half.
And so, if you've already got the telescope out, you can still dialogue box through it, but yeah. Anyway.
That necklace what you're after, is it? Well.
So that's how you can get like really good footage even if you don't actually have the camera mod. And I don't think you can actually interact with NPCs while you gesture, so the prone thing doesn't work. But oh yeah. So there's another way to get like good NPC stuff, and you could like put your character behind them, and sometimes you can use Marika's Mischief to make your character model not that visible, and I will show you an example of that. Hell is wrong with you? sorry, chat. So okay, maybe I was doing it normally this one.
Did you read the letter left for you?
Okay, this might be it.
It's true then.
See, I got better with the telescope thing over time. So this was not the tip.
I always was.
Alright, this one's too short. So this one, my character is behind Tanith. And you can't actually tell, but this is me because I've transmogrified myself into like a brazier looking like thing. So this is my character right there. So that's another way to get good footage like that. And I also do it with Vare.
Oh, yes. Tarnished.
So this is me like walking away.
Between
I'm like, oh no, this isn't working. And then I'm going to like switch it up. So I'll go a bit forward a bit more. Okay.
There is one shining ray of hope for even the maidenless.
All right, so those are like some of my footage gathering tips if you want to up that production value. And you don't have to do that stuff. Your videos are perfectly fine, but since you seemed interested. You still don't know how to put your telescope away without doing another action? You just press the button again. So I always put the telescope on like the item hotbar rather than the hold triangle or whatever the Xbox button is, and then like the arrow, the D-pad buttons. It reminds you of the pain of duping Great One's wisdom. Yeah, okay, I'm glad that's all helpful for you. Yeah. All right. All right, I'm gonna back up the video a little bit just to make sure that, you know, he's making his point and I wasn't interrupting again.
Or vision Gideon. He is the more likely of the two to want to repair the world and keep things relevant.
Right. So yeah, I don't like the whole idea of Gideon looking into the mind of Radagon, if for no other reason than the item description says it's Marika. But with Radagon being Marika to some degree and Marika kind of being gone, I can definitely see the logic behind that thought, even if I dislike it. It could still be right for all we know. Hey, Tim Diggity, nice to see you again. Yeah, welcome to the stream. Yeah, you have yours set to the hotbar. Yeah, I would not recommend doing the hotbar. But yeah, okay.
Relatively the same. After all, Marika and Radagon are the same person. Perhaps he mistook the revelation's true sender. This message or vision Gideon saw could be from Radagon or someone else aside from Marika's will. However, further evidence would be needed in the expansion DLC or community research to be sure. The irony lies in the notion that he cannot see past his own endless quest and accept the unknowns or possibilities. His fear is what ultimately betrays him and clouds his ability to learn or investigate further.
Agreed.
He essentially is stunned with no rationale left to think or act clearly. The pursuit of knowledge in terms of both the Tarnished and the Bearer of the Curse's journey could suggest that the true answers lie in one's own actions rather than in books or study.
You know what's kind of crazy now that I think about it? This kind of more or less confirms that Gideon probably knew of the Elden Beast specifically. If he knew we couldn't kill a god, he seems to recognize that it's not the America thing that's the issue. Because he doesn't seem to say like that he doesn't want to kill America. He just says a god, which kind of, to me, would imply Elden Beast / Radagon. But, you know, mostly Elden Beast.
The act of not knowing what might be in store, but pushing onwards anyways, is the deterrent of the type of knowledge Gideon and Aldea seek. The player in both games is expressing pursuit of knowledge in a more primal or experiential sense, rather than its acquisition through books, history, artifacts, magic, or experimentation. Knowledge in both DS2 and Elden Ring specifically is the pursuit of answering the world's biggest questions and mysteries. It is often about understanding the concepts many are too fearful or unable to comprehend.
So yeah, I'm really thinking about that paradigm here between the pursuit of knowledge versus experiencing it, and why like the player character is more ordained or accepted for like going on their quest than some of these knowledge seekers. I think it might just be because... Actually, I don't really know, because like Aldia seems like he would have had the will for the most part to carry out what he wanted, but he still ultimately failed. I think it's because he couldn't come up with the answer. Okay, maybe this is it. It's not so much that you need to experience knowledge, it's that you need to make a decision, so you like make your experience rather than knowledge informing you of what decision to make, I guess. Maybe that's the difference? How does that feel to you guys, chat? The crown is warranted with strength. Yeah. Because I was like thinking of the kind of hilarious, juxtaposition of having like a 99 int character become like Lord or Monarch or whatnot versus your 9 stat intelligence character, like lower than the base 10 of like the Wretch. So, yeah. Both equally deserving of the throne, provided they have the strength to seek it. Hey, yeah, nice to see you.
Between and Drang Lake are places of enigma that can never be fully understood. Both Gideon and Aldia are prime examples of the price that comes with the pursuit and dangers of knowledge. Both of these characters were corrupted by their aims. They could not shake the possibility of endless possibilities or see the futility of answering these questions that likely cannot be answered. The answer might have been right in front of them all along, they just couldn't see it. Fear and perhaps madness drove them beyond their original morals, values, and in some case their physical form. They lost everything because all they sought to accomplish meant little in the grand scheme of things. It wasn't until those who had the strength to persevere and shape a world in their image that those answers could be explored under a new or different rule. Knowledge is never complete, and knowledge never will be complete. To be all-knowing or to escape the yoke of fate, or the end that should not be, first starts with not participating in those respective, infinite, fruitless pursuits of knowledge. Perhaps
I would refine that by saying letting go is kind of like the one way to escape it. And that'll like tie into some of the notes that I have about Aldia that I'll probably get into pretty shortly here. And so, hey Jan, we are talking about the cruelty and the failure of knowledge in both Elden Ring and Dark Souls 2 by Level T. I'm really bad at names, I almost forgot it.
the less we know, the better. With all these concepts in mind, feel free to let me know your thoughts on knowledge and its representation through Gideon and Aldia, and by extension Elden Ring and DS2.
Okay, cool. I'm going to go back up because I want to like re-listen to that last sentence you said, since that was like my jumping off point, and then I'll go into a little bit of a spiel about Aldia.
Knowledge is never complete, and knowledge never will be complete. To be all-knowing or to escape the yoke of fate, or the end that should not be, first starts with not participating in those respective, infinite, fruitless pursuits of knowledge.
Right, so not participating is very similar to what I'm going to say, but like I said, I want to put a bit of a different spin on it based off of the actions of Aldia specifically here. So I do have a couple notes about Aldia that I'd like to address from earlier in the video, and they tie into what I characterized as Aldia's research into life more specifically than fire and darkness. And part of the reason why I say he looks into life is because there's that common thread between fire and darkness of life that isn't fully explained in Dark Souls. And obviously we don't entirely know what is the first sin that Aldia is the scholar of. Many people believe it to be linking the first flame, which I think is pretty on the mark for the most part. But I think it's the malformed claw in Dark Souls 2, which does say it a bit more explicitly. I guess I should pull up the text if I have it. I know it's some of his malformed items. I know one of the malformed items isn't exactly correct in the English, and then the other one is more correct. So it's not the malformed skull, the shell. Oh, okay, malformed shell. So if Aldia is the scholar of the first sin, and then the malformed shell says, the peculiar figure known as Lord Aldia attempted to uncover the secrets of life itself, and then viewed the undead as a key to this mystery. To me, this would imply that Aldia was researching life. So that's kind of why I'm coming up with this conclusion here. And let me look back at my notes here. Where are they? I'm blind. Aldia, dragons, and eternal life. Oh, yeah. So I don't remember why I wanted to mention the dragons. I think you did. Oh, yeah, because you're like talking about bonfires and Aldia himself. So, yeah, part of the reason why I think he was very interested in the dragons is because he was interested in life, and dragons kind of represented a form of eternal life in the Dark Souls series, which is why he was trying to recreate one, and why I think Aldia and his, retinue went on to create Shanalot, even though she was a failed vessel for them. And the aged feather in Dark Souls 2 is really poorly translated, in my opinion. Might be like one of the worst translation errors in like the entire franchise, really. So the aged feather says, the child of the dragon, sequestered away from the world, imagined a world of boundless possibilities from the side of a mere feather. So this is kind of nice. It's kind of poetic, but okay, so when Shanalot, so like a feather came in from somewhere like else, and then once Shanalot got a hold of the feather, she began to envision freedom, but it's not that she envisioned, that she willed for freedom. I'm trying to think of a better way to say it. Yearned. Okay, yeah. That's definitely it. She yearned for freedom. And because of that yearning is something that's intrinsic to the dark. It's at the heart of like what Nashandra is. She's a child of the dark, and she is unbridled yearning, that insatiable hunger for more. So Shanalot, because she has these emotions which are inherently dark, could not be a perfect vessel to be rid of darkness, I feel, or something along those lines. So that's what Aldia was trying to do to overcome that undead curse, because he wanted to find a way to live with the mind of a man without the complications of going hollow and losing his individuality, and dying and losing that kind of individuality as well. And then I have more to say, but I want to check in with chat. Jan says, if you escape it, you're no longer able to participate in it. I'll try to get back to that point, because I don't remember how he worded his thing, and I'll try to like get back to escaping the cycle, because that'll tie into like my next point. Dragons are forever for it. Well, sort of, kind of, not exactly. Pigsy says, if a crown is warranted by strength, why doesn't the game ever hint that Radagon is illegitimate? He was given the crown when he is a mere champion. Well, I mean, he's legitimate until he gets overthrown with strength. So the real question is like, what the hell was going on between the transition of Godfrey's time to Radagon stuff? Because like after a point, strength wasn't necessary anymore. So maybe Radagon's strength was strength of a different sort than the raw strength. Strength of conjoining rather than strength of destroying. Jan says, you heard that Dark Souls 2 in general is badly translated. Is that true? Not exactly. The thing is, the games are so cryptic at times that even like minor differences can have profound impacts on how something can be read. And so, generally speaking, the game is all right. It's pretty good most places, but there are some critical errors which can really change perspectives of things, and maybe it isn't entirely fair to say that these were errors. I know Dark Souls 2 was stuck in development hell for a very long time, and there's a chance that the translators didn't have enough time to put as much tender loving care into the product as they wanted to, or there could have been a chance that a lot of stuff got revised and then those revisions weren't passed back into the other languages, because I've definitely seen evidence of that in Bloodborne. But yeah, that's a good question. So sorry I can't give you like a more direct answer, because it's not ever really ever that simple. I can tell you about more like specific passages which I think should have been different, but that's just kind of the nature of the beast. And IE not welcome into the stream. Radagon hit himself so that he doesn't have to fight. You cannot get to him unless you sort of smoke him out. I mean, he does try to beat the hell out of us, and he did beat the hell out of my ass for a couple tries when I was trying to get through it. So, I mean, he does throw down when he needs to. But he did lose. Well, he did fight Renala to a stalemate, so maybe he's not the biggest badass that there could have ever been. Maybe he wasn't fully deserving. So if he isn't fully deserving, maybe I could see why someone would say he's illegitimate. And then Kyle brings up an interesting point in that Radagon had the strength of ideals. He was a legal hound of the Golden Order and sought to become one. Sounds very zealous, but you agree illegitimate because he didn't earn the crown, he was given it. It's all good, Jonah. That tends to happen to me at the later hours of the stream as well. And Chilean Gamer, welcome in. You say, as a translator yourself, you can say that without the proper context, you're bound to make some mistakes. Absolutely. And that isn't to say like none of my stuff has issues. Like you just saw me a moment ago, like floundering with the Shanalot stuff because I couldn't think of the right nuance of like yearning in relation to what the Aged Feather was talking about. So yeah, and when you're translating on certain projects like professionally, you don't always have enough time on your side to make as precise word selections as you'd like. Hopefully you'll have a project lead or a senior editor to clean up that stuff and like keep track of like what terms have more specific meanings or importance that need to be like paid extra special attention to. But I mean, that can vary wildly between project to project. Yeah, and as Ponyboy says, and this has annoyed me for a while, we don't really see Radagon actually use any of the sorceries in his fight. And I don't... Yeah, he doesn't use like traditional sorceries. Maybe you could argue some of his lightning stuff is a sorcery, but you know, big ol' X to doubt that. Alright, so Kyle, I'm going to leave your comment there for now and then go back into my spiel after I hydrate real quick. Okay, yeah, I almost asked this or almost said it, but then I was like, wait, maybe he does use it because I don't always remember exactly every move a boss can use. And I was surprised the other night on stream when the Tree Sentinel did like a golden parry or whatever it's called and shot like light at a spellcaster. But Jan says, you're still miffed that he didn't actually use Radagon's Ring of Light in that fight. Yeah, that's what vexes the most, as far I would say. All right. So going back to that theme of Aldia and the yoke of knowledge, as I believe Level T referred to it a moment ago, and life as I would refer to it. So this takes a lot of context, which I think is kind of hidden in the Japanese. And when I say hidden in the Japanese, I do kind of mean that, because this is terminology that's shared very sparingly across Dark Souls 2 and 3 specifically, where this idea of the yoke has a broader context that only comes up a very small amount of times. So what Aldia refers to as the yoke of fate is actually, I don't remember his dialogue there. Let me see if I have it. Oh, damn it. Okay. So, all right, I'll need to try to think of how to recontextualize this stuff. So, For anybody who's curious about what I'm about to like show on screen, this comes from my Bloodborne Japanese retranslation guide. You can Google that if you don't ever have access to the link. Just type in Bloodborne Japanese retranslation, and my thing should be like the first thing that appears. But if you go to the bottom of the retranslation guide, I do have like a Dark Souls tab of like random assorted stuff that's not actually sorted very well. But here is the link to my spreadsheets if anybody wants it. I do have some of Aldia's stuff. There's probably like a bunch of stuff that I should like touch up again. But anyway, leaving all that aside, when Aldia calls it the Yoke of Fate in his dialogue here, the Japanese is different, whereas fate comes from Inga, which I talk about a lot on my last video about the grace of old. Causality or karma would be one way to understand this. So he says, I sought to shed the yoke of fate, but failed. Now I only wait an answer, blah, blah, blah. So I'll need to pivot from like stressing this fate point and this yoke point. But anyway, he once challenged causality and failed. And you could kind of think of causality as a reference to, disparity in a way, where like once you have light, you have darkness. Once you have a cause, you have a reaction. I think that's kind of like what this hints at. So he challenged the cycle of linking the flame and failed, and now he's merely awaiting an answer or a solution to his issue, and he's going to pawn that off on whomever would become Lord. But anyway, yoke in other contexts, as Aldia's dialogue will point to, is kind of more of a reference to life itself, and he talks about shackles, I think. So that'll come up and okay, maybe it's Vendrick. Okay, yeah. It's Vendrick. Okay, that's the issue. Hold on, let me go back. Okay, no. Oh, he does talk about. Okay. Peace grants men the illusion of life. Shackled by falsehoods, they yearn for love. Unaware of its grand illusion, until the curse touches their flesh. We are bound by this yoke. Okay, here's where the yoke comes in. As true as the dark that churns within men. So I think there's a lot of issues with Aldia and Vendrick's dialogue specifically. If you want like a more active reading of this stuff, I have that all on my video about the hollowing and the true face of men. I talk about Aldia and Vendrick's dialogue more specifically there. And what this dialogue means to me, based off of what I've looked at in the Japanese here, is that men are living, but the life that they live is a false one, a false life that binds them, because they come to love the life that they believe they have, even though that life isn't actually the life that they think it is. And what that means to me is that men are darkness, as would be kind of stated plainly to us by characters like Agdane in the Undead Crypts, that man was once one with the dark. And so because man was once one with the dark, we are the dark. But the false life that we lead in Dark Souls is due to does he say it here? A fleeting vessel? Oh no, that's the Vendrick dialogue. The false life is a lie, and that'll become apparent to us when the curse mark appears on our flesh. Like, that's not what we actually are. And so in Aldi's estimation, we have this illusion of life. It's a construction, a facade, because we're not actually hollows, but we come to love that illusion of life, and we become shackled by that narrative, that falsehood, which is why he asks if we would spoil that wonderful falsehood in English. The Japanese for these two paragraphs are like, man is made to live in the midst of peace and stability, and so he believes and cherishes a false prison, aka like the hollow vessel, even if it may all be a lie. Until the time the curse is finally revealed on our flesh, it's the yoke imposed upon us. So he's saying that the false prison is the yoke, which I believe to be like the hollow meat bag and not the darkness itself. I understand I'm being really redundant here, but it's kind of necessary, unfortunately. And then Aldia says, dark itself is the truth which resides within men. So. And then I'll talk about like that stuff and like letting go of it. So all man is in the midst of a false life, but is it really that bad in the end? A false fabricated life, yet an incomparably sweet, gentle world. And then he asks us, even now, do you still desire to release the yoke and shatter the falsehood? So he's asking us if we would be released from our hollow form and shatter this kind of false, hollow life that we have. Pun intended, I suppose. And then, I don't know why this was in quotes. Oh, it must be like the dialogue which follows. He asks like what we'll do with it. So, that along with Vendrick's dialogue kind of like fits together. So yeah, oh man, I always forget like how bad this ends up being in the final build. So Vendrick says in the localization that Dranglake will fall, the fire will fade, and the souls of old will reemerge. With dark unshackled, a curse will be upon us, and men will take their true shape. So I don't want to try to like figure out what this means to the localization. I'll just recontextualize it based off of the Japanese here. He says like the kingdom's being destroyed, fire is unraveling, then the ancient souls are reclaiming power. Darkness will undo the shackles and become a curse. And as I mentioned a moment ago, based off of like Aldia's dialogue, we understand that the shackle is kind of like life itself, or what we believe to be life, and dark can undo that. So if dark becomes unshackled, men will be able to regain their proper form, the form that they should have. And then later on, Vendrick will ask that even if like darkness is man's true form, he wonders if that is the form we truly should have. And let me see if I have that dialogue right here somewhere. Okay, yeah. So, one day fire will fade and dark will become a curse. Men will be free from death, left to wander eternally. Dark will again be ours, and in our true shape, we can bury the false legends of yore. Only, is this our only choice? Seeker of fire, coveter of the throne, seek strength, the rest will follow. So we do have the whole strength thing even in Dark Souls 2, as Level T was talking about. This dialogue is kind of okay if you know what he's talking about. I think the Japanese is slightly more explicit about it. Vendrick says, eventually fire will fade, dark will become a curse. Man will be freed from death and gain eternity in the forms they obtained from darkness long ago. So this is a really weird set of lines in the Japanese, and it took me a while to try to parse what it was actually saying. So what I think he's trying to get at is, if man is freed from death, that's because they've regained their form from darkness. They've kind of reverted back to the humanity sprite. And because they revert back to the humanity sprite, the false story will end, aka life will end, but is this the form we should have? Is the humanity sprite the form we should have? Seeker of fire, cover to the throne, seek strength, the rest will follow. It's all pretty much the same there. So hopefully that makes sense. Now going back to my point that I was trying to make, like with before all this context was necessary here, like my stuff down here, if the yoke and shackles are life itself, then letting go of it means being able to escape this kind of cycle, which is what you get with Dark Souls 3 and even Dark Souls 2 and Dark Souls 1 with the whole ancient dragon stuff, and meditating and becoming more draconic by letting go of one's attachments and desires, because dark itself is the dark attachment. It is that dark desire, which is why Shanalot was born of dragons, but is not a full dragon, because she does have those emotions. But when you go to Archdragon Peak, you find humanoid dragon folk that are stuck in these meditative poses, but they're no longer alive anymore because they've kind of escaped the cycle of life and death by losing their attachments to it, which is very akin to the ideas of nirvana in Buddhism, where it's enlightenment by letting go of attachment. So you kind of seek that ultimate knowledge because you kind of like gain enlightenment, but that form of enlightenment isn't necessarily knowledge as much as it is, maybe this is not like a good word for it in English, just understanding, I guess, might be a slightly different way to spin that. So if you understand the nature of the world and you understand your role in the world, and if you make your peace with it, you can kind of leave the world behind and attain nirvana and leave the cycle inherent within like light and dark of Dark Souls. And that is also kind of corroborated perhaps somewhat in who loses their darkness in Dark Souls. Definitely the Archdragon Peak folk. There is Dark Souls 1 with Go or Guff, depending on how you want to read his name, where he is carving his emotions into his like wood carvings, and then he'll eventually become a tree. That's something that the giants can do. Like if you let go of your emotions, you can become like an ancient dragon-like thing, or you can become a tree-like thing. And then obviously there's like some nuance to it because like people are like unwillingly being turned into trees in Dark Souls 3, which I don't really want to get into. So anyway, going back to the point he made in his video here, and then I'll like really catch up with chat because I've like gone so long on this tangent here. I just want to re-listen to this point and address it a bit more directly now that I've set the context necessary to like make my point again.
It wasn't until those who had the strength to persevere and shape a world in their image that those answers could be explored under a new or different rule. Knowledge is never complete, and knowledge never will be complete. To be all-knowing or to escape the yoke of fate, or the end that should not be, first starts with not participating in those respective, infinite, fruitless pursuits of knowledge.
Right, and so because Gideon is attached to that idea of knowledge, he can't let it go, and because he can't let it go, he will never achieve that true enlightenment that he would need to, you know, like get that enlightenment he craves. And that's kind of similar to the situation of Seath in Dark Souls 1, because Seath is mortal in like the literal sense here. He wants scales of the Dragonstone scales of immortality, but it's because of his desire and being blinded by his ambitions that he will never achieve true immortality, which is done through letting go of life in Dark Souls, because he can't let go of life, because that's the thing he desires. He desires to live eternally, but paradoxically, living eternally doesn't really work for the dragons because they're not alive. That's like made explicit by Miyazaki. Ancient dragons aren't alive. They're like para-life. I don't know how else to say that. So, okay. Yeah, I definitely really liked his point here. I do agree with it. I just wanted to tweak it to just kind of like enhance the point that I think he was like, I don't want to say like he's off of, I just like have a slightly different perspective on it. So I think I could like use this to build up like the points that I wanted to make. So yeah, no, I definitely enjoyed this video so far. So I'm going to catch up with you guys in the chat and then finish the rest of it here. So Galamoth says, is it possible to boil down Aldia's philosophy to one word or phrase, or is that too redundant? No, I think it's very able to be done, and I think Ludleth would be a good counterpoint to Aldia, or maybe not counterpoint, a way to enhance Aldia's point. So I think I have Ludleth's dialogue here. And of course, I'm going to be referencing the Japanese, because why the hell wouldn't I at this point, you know? Betrayal, right? Okay. Ludleth talks about getting the eyes of a firekeeper, and they like show a world of darkness. So to look at his English text, I might be able to just work with this, but I might go back to the Japanese. The eyes show a world destitute of fire, a barren plain of endless darkness, a place born of betrayal. So I willed myself, Lord, to link the fire, to paint a new vision. What is thine intent? So I took the mantle of Lord of Cinder of mine own volition. I speak these words with pride. Choose thy fate alone, seize it with thine own hands. All the more should thy fate entail such a foul betrayal. So this betrayal he's talking about means not linking the fire and letting it fade. So he chose not to let the fire fade because he thought that would be a betrayal to life, which I think is a little bit clearer in the Japanese. So that which the eyes show is an ending of inheriting fire, a world of eternal, never-ending darkness. I thought it was a betrayal. I wish to change the vision by inheriting fire, so I became a lord. What would you do? I became a lord of kindling of my own will, and I have pride in it. And so you should make your choice by your own will. Even more so if it would be a terrible betrayal. So I think Ledleth's message here is kind of very similar to the philosophy that Aldia has. So, if you choose between light and darkness, let it be your own choice, because that is like something that it's a personal choice, because both Aldia and Vendrick talk about whether darkness is the form that man should have. Ledleth thinks it's a betrayal, but he doesn't necessarily begrudge us if we do make this kind of choice of betrayal ourselves. And that's kind of where Aldia is. So basically, light or dark, it's the individual's decision, even if that individual's decision will affect the entire world, kind of. So in other words, a crown is warranted with strength. The kind of quintessential FromSoft philosophy here. All right, Jonah, I appreciate you hanging in as long as you have, if you're still around. Thanks, bro. See you later. Thanks, Bunkle. Appreciate the news. Jan asks, aren't hollows the natural form of humanity and the normal non-zombie humans are the false ones? So that's kind of where, I mean, hopefully you picked up more as I was talking for a very long time. That's where I would argue Aldia and Vendrick's comments about the falsehoods of life come from, that the people in Dark Souls are kind of oblivious to the true origins of man, as Agdane would say that they were one with the dark, meaning that they are darkness, they're not like the skeleton dudes. And the betrayal and the falsehood of life is that people think that their bodies, the hollow bodies, the skeleton bros, are they themselves, when they're truly the humanity sprite piloting their meat mech suits. And as Galamoth asks, ego death? I believe so. I believe that is the way to escape the cycle of life and death in Dark Souls specifically. And for anybody who's like wondering about like ego death, so ego is kind of like the sense of self, and a lot of emotions are tied up with it. So once you let go of your attachments, you no longer have to worry about this concept of I. That'll kind of disappear and you kind of become one with the world. And that's kind of like part of the process of attaining nirvana, you know, depending on schools of thought. So don't just like take that as like the, you know, universal answer there. Maybe Aldia would sum up his philosophy with seek strength, the rest will follow. Maybe, yeah. Wave said, you definitely see Marika very much as a Gwyn-like figure now, in the sense that she's prolonging an age of sort of undeath in direct opposition to the natural order established by both games. Yes, I've had that opinion for a while now, too. Actually, pretty much at, like, you know, the first time I played the game, like, oh, she's kind of like Gwyn. But yeah. You're really excited to see how the choices to reiterate on it this time based on the new stuff. Yeah, Scalisi says, even Aldia questions his appeal to nature fallacy. So yeah, it really does come down to the individual's choice to both Aldia and Ludleth there. And so, do you return to nature and embrace Monk, or do you resist it and choose to paint your own new world as done by relinking the fire? Which kind of gets pooped on a lot by Dark Souls 3, but it's like, okay, if you keep relinking the fire, guys, eventually the power is going to go out. We need to like let the batteries rest and cool off before it overheats. Jan asks, if you let go of ego and your attachments, are you essentially obliterated and quote unquote yourself is quote unquote dead? Maybe dead isn't the right word, even though I don't think you're wrong. I would say like yourself, your consciousness ceases to exist within the confines of Elden Ring. And of course, like speaking about this from like a Buddhist lens depends quite a bit on one's individual school that they ascribe to, or like their own personal philosophy. Because I know like certain sects of Buddhism believe in things like bodhisattvas. So people who have like realized kind of like they're like on the edge of enlightenment, but have deliberately turned it down so that way they could help others on that path to enlightenment. And realize it for themselves. So it's kind of like a more noble way to stay attached to the world, but still be like part of the path to enlightenment themselves. So yeah, that you could potentially make the argument that that might be similar to like what Shanalot is, perhaps, but she doesn't really like bring us to the path of dragons. So it's kind of like a personal journey that can be aided by others, but it's kind of ultimately like letting go of the self, because one of the most prominent beliefs of Buddhism is that the universe is avidya and anatman, which means it is without self and without why am I blinking? Is without knowledge and without self. Avidya anatman. So avidya. So anatman is without self. Okay. So yeah, avidya is without knowledge. And that kind of ties into like the Locust Preacher's dialogue, one of the Locust Preachers, where it says like the world began without knowledge and so will it end. And yeah. So if you don't have knowledge and you don't, so it's not that you don't have knowledge, you just realize like knowledge isn't like actually an intrinsic aspect of the universe. It's just a human perspective of what the universe is like. And once you let go of that kind of self-centered perspective, which hinges on that idea of self, you realize that everything is interconnected, and the division of what is you kind of becomes meaningless, because there is no you. It's just you are part of the universe. So it is kind of like the ego death, but it's a little bit of a misunderstanding of like the idea of ego to begin with, because like at the end goal of like Buddhism, there is no ego, so it's not ego death, because to say that there's ego death would imply that an ego must have existed for it to die, if that makes sense. Hey Kitsune, yes, I have heard that Quayla got her channel back. We've been keeping up with the news, thank you though. Yeah, as Galamoth says, it's the Force, the self is an illusion. Pantheon says, so does that mean Marika achieved enlightenment in the DLC trailer, causing the split of her and Radagon, and thus an ego death? No, I would argue that's different, because Marika still has attachments, which is why she like chooses to shatter her ring and prolong her age. She's not truly ego died. She's just kind of like shifted personalities a bit. And to be fair, I don't know exactly how well the lens or the frame of Buddhism should be applied to Elden Ring. Whereas I feel like these correlations are pretty well suited to Dark Souls, but I also don't want to just say like, oh, discard what Dark Souls has to say in favor of this lens. I feel like the two can help like both inform each other. So yeah, let's go ahead and finish out the rest of the video here.
These characters, the more similarities that there were. In many ways, they pursue knowledge in similar fashion, but how they react or view knowledge is rather different, but play off one another rather well. Aldia's curiosity and Gideon's fear serve as nice alternating stances on the same theme in both games. They may not necessarily be evolutions of one another, but they do really highlight the ideas and themes surrounding the price of knowledge and what it means to be knowledgeable in their respective games. Gideon definitely has a lot less humility than Aldia, and that shows in how his final interaction goes. While I can see why Gideon fights the player towards the end of the game, one aspect I have never quite understood in parallel is why Aldia fights the player at the end of DS2 beyond just simply testing them. If you have any...
I think that's literally it, that Aldia needs to know that we have the strength to make our choice for ourselves.
Thoughts or ideas on that, feel free to let me know in the comments below. I'd love to hear what you all think about that in particular. There are also many mechanical similarities, such as their boss fight presentation and function as NPCs. I believe these two have the most dialogue out of any character in Soulsborne, so that seems rather fitting given that they are both scholars and knowledgeable individuals on their respective worlds. They also function as guides, offering some direction for the player too, which further aids those similarities of gameplay function. I also see both characters as a sort of representations of the futility of even understanding the stories and lore of these games. Many of us get into the lore and can be like Gideon or Aldia, pondering the meaning of these concepts, item descriptions, and dialogue without having the full story, myself included. I'm sure many of us have had that trademark Gideon hunch from reading wikis and watching videos since Elden Ring came out.
And that's why I have Nightbot tell me to not be shaped like a banana punk. To not be a banana-shaped punk. Oh well. I mean, look at this banana. He be bananing.
We like to think we all know something, but there is always a contradiction or gap in our knowledge.
Ah, my apologies. Lost myself for a moment there.
Anyways, thanks so much for watching. If you like this video, please consider liking and subscribing to the channel. I appreciate you taking the time to check out this video and the channel, as well as sharing your thoughts in the comments. The discourse on these past videos has been great, so put on your ICER coat and let me know what you think down below. I'll exchange any findings you might have for further videos.
Right, yeah, so
Take
I
care,
definitely...
and I hope to see you again in the next one.
Yeah, I definitely
These
enjoyed that video.
namby-pamby tarnished think us no more than a shelter from the rain.
Obviously, I think there's a bit more context at hand with like the Japanese translations of Dark Souls 2 to like build on these points, which I'm glad to share here. Oh, I didn't subscribe. That I'm glad to share here because not everybody has access to such content or context rather. And here is the link to that video in the chat if you guys want to give Level T a like yourselves and or like a view and whatnot. I'm sure he'd appreciate that. And Level T, if you're still around in the chat, thanks so much for hopping in, and let me know if you have any comments, if you're still around. If not, totally understandable. So yeah, definitely curious to see what else you'll be producing in the future there. So I've definitely gone ahead and subscribed myself to your channel. So you seem to be pretty new, only 8 videos. All right. All right, everybody. Unless Level T is like typing right now, I'm going to like stall for time a little bit. Otherwise, I think that's pretty much going to be the end of the stream for tonight. I don't know what I want to watch tomorrow yet. I kind of like have almost no idea. Maybe I'll get into some other reactions to the DLC trailer again, because I saw Mad Luigi popped one out. I didn't get to Tim Diggity's yesterday or Kite Tales. I did manage to like see Ziostorms through listening to Ratatosker on his stream the other day. So, right. Galamoth says Elden Ring is truly the sequel to Dark Souls 2. Oh no. Thanks, Alex. I will look for that Albinoric woman off stream, perhaps. All right. But yeah, that'll be it for me for tonight, everybody. We will be going live at the same time of 10 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. Hopefully, we'll catch you on that next stream. But before we fully close out, we do have Level T still lurking here. He said, thanks for checking out the channel. You appreciate the feedback, and you should be releasing a video breaking down your thoughts on the recent trailer. Thanks again. Looking forward to it, my man. Yeah, if you do release that, you could either like let me know with a comment or something. I do have a Discord server if you want to like have me ever look at a video in particular, or if you want to like talk more lore. Everybody's welcome to join me. It's pinned up here at the top of the chat, and it should be somewhere in my video description if you guys want to join that way. So, right. Till then, thank you so much for joining. I definitely appreciate that. Take care. Stay safe. Last Protagonist out.